Number 10, Hawkeye. Ultimate Hawkeye first appeared in Ultimate issue 7, and he doesn't mind going for the kill this time around. He was a SHIELD agent who wasn't as fancy when it came to arrows, he's just more military this time around. It's actually pretty dark at times. He became a super soldier once briefly when the Avengers were put on the USS Jimmy Carter. They got captured, and then Hawkeye and a few others ingested super soldier serum, and then they rescued Nick Fury. Hawkeye is a pretty sweet agent. He's badass, he gets it done, but his family life and dynamic with Black Widow this time around is much different than most would think. When a team of mercenaries broke into Clint's house early on, they took out his wife and kids, which is awful, but it gets even worse when you find out that Black Widow was the leader of said mercenary team. And then Hawkeye gets even in a pretty gruesome way. 3 arrows, perfectly placed. Gory. Pretty gory, very gory. Number 9, Nick Fury. When he entered the Ultimates and Marvel Team Up issue 5, Nick Fury would soon take over as director of S.H.I.E.L.D. And his first plan was to bring back the Super Soldier program, which actually resulted in the creation of Ultimate Captain America and Ultimate Hulk, etc. His origins are pretty unique. I mean, he fought for the US in World War II, and tragically he was taken by force to be the next test subject for Project Rebirth. When he was injected with this new serum, it gave him super strength, and in turn, he freed himself and other prisoners and busted out of there. So now he's got quite the power behind those punches, and Ultimate Nick Fury is way cooler than our 616 Nick Fury because he was designed to look like Samuel L. Jackson, so it's really no contest. And before we continue on with this list of Ultimate heroes, if you want to go ahead and give this video a thumbs up, that would be awesome. It really does help our channel out a lot. I'm not going to waste any more of your time. Let's go right back into this list. Thank you so much. Number 8, Nightcrawler. Kurt Wagner made his Ultimate debut in Ultimate X-Men issue 7. Now his origins here had him growing up in the Weapon X program, and he was trained to become an assassin from the start. He had a pretty dark upbringing, and in turn he would have these bad pockets with the X-Men. Like Warren and Dazzler were a couple, but Kurt also liked Dazzler, so he kidnapped her? Okay. And the team was like, hey, so we're gonna put you in a coma now because that's not cool. We can't really do that. And then he came back and he apologized. The dust was settled, no hard feelings. Okay, sure. He joined Colossus' X-Men team with Dazzler and Angel, by the way, so it was definitely fine. Kurt wasn't all bad. He was actually kind of funny, I mean, as a character, because sometimes he would use the Danger Room with Angel to reenact Pirates of the Caribbean instead of, you know, fighting bad guys. So already this version is my kind of guy. I mean, minus the kidnapping part, of course. Him and Angel were tight because they couldn't hide their mutations, so they ended up being best of friends. So they fought pirates together, chased the same girls, they're living the mutant dream in a way. Not bad. Sadly, Kurt was killed by Magneto's ultimatum wave, and it got a lot of other X-Men killed as well. So it's dark, it's nice, and then it's dark. That's the Ultimates. Number 7, Silver Searcher. So the name is a little different for Norrin Radd in the Ultimates. He made his first debut in Ultimate Fantastic Four issue 42. He was teleported to Earth after Reed Richards mistook him for a star that he wanted to harness. So he brought him here. Awesome, it wasn't his fault. So naturally the world was also in chaos because of his arrival. But Norrin said that he would summon his master who would make the population of Earth happier than they've ever been. Fresh water for all, free phone plans, taxing the rich. What is this plan, sir? The Searcher's master was Zenla's ruler at the time. Revka Termaloon Edifax Skyros III. Rolls off the tongue nice and easy. Cool. Also known as the king without enemies. Let's just go with that. So this king would use mind control. That's the trick here, to get mind control and get these humans to worship them. So after Psycho Man took over the Earth, Silver Searcher rescued Mr. Fantastic and asked him to save the planet. Now the Searcher helped the Fantastic Four afterwards and then continued wandering the depths of space. Now we'd love to see a betrayal, especially when it's for the good side, you know? Norrin is great, and in the Ultimates, he is immortal, and he's powerful enough to go against the Phoenix, so yeah, we need more of him. Number 6, Loki. Making his first appearance in the Ultimates 2 issue 1, Loki Odinson was much more powerful here. He has the ability to shuffle time and space, as Thor simply puts it. In the beginning, Loki would fight alongside Thor and Balder. They were the Warriors 3. Now his mother was a prisoner of Odin and asked him to bring her the Norn stones, but while he was stealing them, he took out his brother Balder and of course was banished to Asgard afterwards. Now Loki can literally warp reality in the Ultimates. He can retcon history into anything he wanted to. He could create these events that just never happened until he was depowered by Odin, of course. Now, even after he was depowered, he was still able to put up quite a fight as our normal Loki. Now, I want to see more Warriors 3 with them. Like, I would watch a show with just those 3 any day. It's probably going to come come, realistically, at this rate the Marvel's going at. Number 5, Iron Man. Making his first appearance in Ultimate Marvel Team-Up issue 4, Ultimate Iron Man has some medical issues as well, but it's much more bizarre this time around. It's not his heart that makes him unique, it's actually his brain. Now, he was born a genius, of course, and he was also one of 2 twin boys, the other being Gregory Stark. Now, Tony originally wanted to start his own business with his current girlfriend, Josie Gardner, but after so much pressure from his father, he decided to join the family business, and Josie ended up leaving Tony because of this. She was like, oh, I thought we had a thing? Okay, see ya. Then 6 months later, Josie tragically passed away in a plane crash. Now, the plane crash was orchestrated by Mandarin International, which was a company that used to work with Howard Stark earlier, but cut ties. Drama. So Howard wanted Tony to put all that pain into work for the company, but Tony was like, you know what? I think nanotechnology is where I'm gonna put that energy. So after his father's passing, Tony then had to fully take over the company. But by then, he was a troubled celebrity, he was an alcoholic, and things got even harder for Tony when he was diagnosed with an inoperable brain tumor. So he mixed his biotech with armor and he bought himself some time. Now, Ultimate Tony Stark's tumor was actually an Infinity Stone growing in his brain. So with the nanotech body and everything, it just made him stronger, so much stronger. So this gave Tony the ability to transfer his consciousness between other machines. He's actually friends with his brain tumor in this world. His name is actually Anthony. It's a little boy. It's like a separate living hallucination boy. Totally normal. Number 4, Colossus. Making his first appearance in the 1610 universe with Ultimate X-Men issue 1, Peter Rasputin, aka Colossus, was discovered during the Cold War. He was attacked by Anatol Spichkin, but when it was confirmed that Peter was indeed a mutant, a deal was made instead. Anatol would keep his secret, and he was so ready to give Peter a job, but down the road. If he ever needed one, he had a job for him down the road. Of course, he was a giant guy made of metal. He's like, hey, I got some for you to do, trust me. Roofing, stapling, some hammering, we can find you some things. Peter's father, like most fathers in these comics, was not a pleasant man, so Peter thought, you know what, I could use some of that help now, let's go. And then he went back to Anatol because the thing is, Ultimate Colossus had thick skin, literally he was made of steel, but he wasn't strong enough where it really made a huge difference. I mean, sure, drywall is easier to punch through, but it was heavy. Like, imagine wearing a skin suit of metal. The Tin Man probably had insane calves, but it wasn't until Anatol introduced Peter to this drug called Banshee, and that's where he got the strength behind those metal mitts. So now Colossus, on narcotics, was taking on these jobs, these super strong tourist gigs, and at the age of 19, Peter was picked up from Big Boris, a Russian mafia boss, and then he worked with him for 10 years. So he just joined the mafia for 10 years from 19 to 29. You know, the usual thing you do after you're 19. He kept his powers a secret mostly for those around him, and then one day during a botched arm deal, Peter and his team were shot at. Peter survived because of his thick skin, and his mutant ability was also exposed in a much greater way. He was kind of screwed until Jean Grey found him and then offered him a spot with the X-Men. That's actually where he got the codename Colossus. Now this version is unreal. He's close with Wolverine as they both share, you know, horrible backgrounds. They would walk the streets at night just trying to solve these dark cases, looking for trouble. Imagine these two bumping into you. No chance. In Ultimate War, he took on Thor and Iron Man at the same time for 10 minutes. So, how wild is that? Number 3, Ultimate Red Skull. Making his debut in the Ultimate Comics Avengers 1 back in 2009, Ultimate Red Skull is, I know, a villain, but he wasn't always that way. He's a lot different than the Red Skull that we know from our main continuity. He's actually the son of Steve Rogers in this universe and Gail Richards. They even hid him and trained him to become the next Captain America. The Ultimates are wild. This is the dream scenario. But he always feared that he would never live up to his father's expectations. Now, it's not like he was raised in a bad household. It was kind of the opposite. He was raised to become a superhero. He was raised to fill some rather big boots. He was raised to become the next Captain America after he was declared dead in Iceland. So he kind of had the dream job, and he was more powerful than Steve Rogers as well. So what happened? So when we're talking about comebacks, I really think Ultimate Red Skull could have been a treat. Now, he was eventually in charge of the military that he grew up with. He figured out now that he was a leader, and he used it against them. His personality as well was pretty easygoing, so it wasn't hard to convince anybody what he was doing. But again, he had this mental wall where he could never live up to Father Rogers. So at age 17, he escaped and took out every doctor and soldier on that team. He just wiped everybody out. So evil. And then he used a kitchen knife to really complete the whole Red Skull look. A nice do-it-yourself makeover. Nice and haunting. So he had all the tools to be great, but that pressure of Steve Rogers took him down the wrong path. Interesting. Number 2, Magneto. He made his first appearance in Ultimate X-Men issue 1. Eric Lenscher was born to 2 Canadian agents of Weapon X. Now he got his abilities and mastered magnetism at a young age, and his father didn't respond well to that. He was intoxicated most of the time, and he attacked Eric one day. Not an ideal living situation for a child. Now he tried to shoot Eric once, but those powers naturally came out, and then Eric pushed the bullet right back. So Eric had to spend his teen years with that guilt weighing down on him. Now eventually he was disgusted with Weapon X, the whole idea of finding a cure for the mutant gene through means of. So he used these abilities, freed Mutant X, Wolverine, who I talked about in part 1 of this list, which you for sure watched. And then Eric married a human woman named Isabel, but he left her once he met Charles Xavier. They didn't fall in love. He was fascinated. This is the first adult mutant that he's ever met, and they share the same ideologies on them. So Eric grabbed these mutant kids from a previous lover and then denied ever loving a human woman. Rough. The Brotherhood relocated to the Savage Land a few years later, and then Eric started referring to the mutants as an army, which is bad news. He was changing, as were his views on this whole mutant operation. He even started going by the name Magneto, totally abandoned his human name, and then Xavier was no longer on board. I mean, this is Supervillain 101. Anybody can see a villain in the making, especially if you can read minds. That sure does help. So Magneto made a helmet that prevented that from ever happening. This helmet prevented psi intrusion into his mind, and it also looked cool. So when Charles took a few loyal followers and made a run for it, Magneto was pretty upset and broke Charles' spine, leaving him in the wheelchair. And finally, number 1, we have Miles Morales. He made his first appearance in Ultimate Fallout issue 4, just a couple months before the death of Peter Parker. Now Norman Osborn was arrested and revealed as the Green Goblin, and then a young thief broke into that empty Osborn industry, and then that's where a genetically enhanced spider found its way into the thief's backpack. Now while Miles Morales was visiting his Uncle Aaron, that spider just happened to crawl out of Uncle Aaron's bag, and then it bit Miles Morales. He of course got these amazing abilities, the Spider-Man abilities, but on top of that he could also turn invisible, which is a pretty sweet gig. That plus Stun Blast makes Miles pretty hard to take down. Now the thing is, what makes him unique is at first Miles didn't really want to be a hero. He wanted to leave that up to the real Spider-Man until his untimely departure, saving his family from Osborn. So Miles got to the scene, but it was too late and too ahead of him. So he felt guilt after this for not being able to save Peter, so he suited up and joined the battle. His first villain was against Kangaroo, and he took him on wearing a Spider-Man Halloween costume, which is a great look. I honestly love Miles. I'm so happy he's in a bigger part of the Spider-Verse that we're currently in, and I'm betting that we meet live-action Miles Morales in the next Spider-Man movie. I think that's the only thing they've managed to keep a secret about that film. I'm calling it now. Guys, who would you cast for a live-action Miles Morales? Let us know in the comments.
Number 10, Double Death Peter. I don't actually have any issues with Spider-Man dying. I don't wish Peter Parker ill. I just feel like death is such a finite ending that sometimes it can be nice to have that in stories so that sometimes we can just move forward as opposed to getting stuck on repeat, stuck in a loop. What I take issue with though when it comes to Peter's deaths in Ultimates, because yeah, I feel like he definitely got more than one, was that he was killed off kind of suddenly or unceremoniously, which meant he had to be brought back again to do it right. And then after all that, we also find out that he's pretty much immortal. Granted, this does also help to make his multiple deaths make sense and give us a nice, neat little ending for Peter as he passes the torch to Miles. But still, that first death, woo, it was a doozy. During Ultimatum, it seems as though Spider-Man, after being forced to fight his nightmares, gets caught up in the midst of a huge explosion initiated by an equally frustrated Hulk. Of course, overall, he appears to survive, but it seems that the intention here originally was to kill him, and that this death was simply retconned away. Also, I don't know if it's just me, but like, I really don't like the argument between Kitty and MJ at the beginning. They're like, I love him. Well, I love him too. Oh my goodness, be quiet. I'm all about love, but that's so, I don't know, just something about it just grates me. Don't like it. You couldn't possibly understand how I feel because I love him. No, well, I love him, so you couldn't possibly understand how I feel. Ugh. Number 9, Magneto kills Professor X. While this might not seem like such a strange and unsettling thing, keep in mind that Magneto and Charles are often presented in the comic book world as being opponents, but still being friends. While this might not seem like such a strange and unsettling thing, keep in mind that Magneto and Charles are often presented in the comic book world as being opponents, but still being friends. And here, for a long while, they were actually allies on Earth 1610. History aside though, this death is a brutal one, mostly because of how easy Magneto makes it seem. Magneto kills Charles by simply breaking his neck. He just snaps it. He doesn't even go all magnetism on him, though he does do that at other times in the Ultimate Universe. I don't know what exactly Charles did to deserve his life in this reality. I mean, it's not like he ignored the growing sentience of a training room who also happened to be a mutant when he claimed to be fighting for all mutant rights, right? Oh wait. Well, you know, at least he never lied to the X-Men about it. Oh wait. Number 8, too sexy? Question mark? Is there such a thing? When it comes to the X-Men in this reality, yes, there might just be something as too sexy. And I'm all for sexy. Here, the X-Men were notorious for being overly sexualized. There are a lot of overt sexual moments that happen with our mutants who seem to be weirdly horny a lot of the time. Look, I'm not saying that heroes and villains can't be sexy, or that they can't be sexual. This is comics after all. Sexiness is a big part of the industry and the allure and the history. But even for comics, this feels like a bit much. This also extended beyond X-Men and other characters, with Natasha and Tony's special tape, and Carol and Tony's love-hate relationship that helped them work through some mutual frustration with each other professionally. When it comes to X-Men, we also learned that Wolverine slept with Magneto's wife, Magda, which made people question who Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch's father really was. To add on to that, Wolverine then saw Wanda and Pietro together getting intimate, which is really weird, but it's especially really weird if Wolverine seems to be their dad maybe, or if that's even like a question. Bottom line, I think the thing that most frustrates me about the sexiness in Ultimates is that it feels like it did a lot of this just for the shock factor. Like, it wasn't even about like sexiness for story or like sexiness for sexiness. It was like sexiness so that people would be like, oh, gasp, what am I reading?
Number 7, the Hulk. First appearing in Ultimate Marvel Team Up issue 2, he's still big, he's still angry, but this time around he is gray. Okay. Now before this, however, Bruce Banner wanted to be just like Captain America, back before he was the Hulk, back before he was big and strong. So at Cambridge University, he was committed to duplicating the super soldier serum with helps of Nick Fury's super soldier blood. So he used it on himself, and honestly, already I'm a fan of Bruce Banner more. I mean, the Hulk hasn't even been created yet, and then Nick Fury, the first super soldier, gathered the best genetic engineers to recreate the serum, and Bruce was luckily amongst them. So Bruce actually thought that he figured this thing out, but again, he wanted to be like Cap and he wanted to stay quiet, so he tested this new serum out on himself, and then he ended up becoming Ultimate Hulk. Later on, Bruce decided to make even more serum, so he mixed Super Soldier Serum again with this new Hulk serum, smashed them together, injected himself, so now Super Soldier Nick Fury actually made Banner the Hulk in this timeline. That's a cool sentence right there. Number 6. Deadpool. Meet Wade Wilson. He had a pretty rough go in the Ultimates, as do most of them. I'd say more intense than his 616 counterpart, because in Ultimate Spider-Man, Wilson gets hired by the Ganosian government, but of course in Deadpool's spirit, he gets hired to double down and hunt these mutants, but it's also a TV event. It's fun. And then when Deadpool is going up against Spider-Man, he actually gets unmasked. And his appearance is even more shocking in this reality. Even the host has to apologize to the viewers at home because his mask, I mean, to begin with, wasn't even really a mask. It's translucent, so not really the best. And then Spider-Man even adds insult to injury, saying that his face smells like a KFC dumpster on a hot day. So if anybody needs redemption, it's definitely Wade Wilson from the Ultimates. Number 5, Juggernaut. The first time we see him, it's very clear that he's more powerful. Something is up with this X-Men. He looked like a future version of the Juggernaut. It was pretty intimidating. Now he looks like an evil stripper from the future, which is, honestly, I like it. It's cool. He was a genius in this universe as well. I mean, literally, the guy was super smart. He grew up in the same trailer park as Rogue, and he still considered himself trailer trash, although he was one of the smartest people alive. Guys, never doubt yourself. Things took a turn when he was taken by Weapon X and forced to be this living weapon of mass destruction. Then following the orders of Colonel John Wraith, he was part of their strike force that took out the X-Men, or even worse, forced the X-Men into Weapon X, which we heard plenty of early on in this list. He walked tall and mighty until he got taken out in the dumbest way possible. Like the Juggernaut, this makes me upset. He for sure needs a redemption, that's all I'm saying. Even when he's fighting Rogue later on, he still wants them to be happy and in love. He still wants that dream, so he's still a good guy deep down. And then Ultimate X-Men issue 99, in the middle of a fight, he gets taken down because of a poisonous dart. A dart. Yeah, just one of those. That's it. The Juggernaut got taken out by a dart. It went right through his visor gap. I mean, amazing aim, but come on. This is the same guy that dropped a building on Gambit? Number 4, Mr. Fantastic. Reed Richards needs a redemption on screen before anything else. I mean, the last Fantastic Four movie, I mean, if you haven't watched it, honestly, don't. Marvel's redoing them soon. You might as well just wait it out. In the Ultimate version, it was dark, and he was younger, and honestly, he was cooler. He made his first appearance in Ultimate Fantastic Four issue 1, and even at the start of Ultimatum, when that big wave hit, Sue bites the bullet, and he didn't waste any time. He's not happy. He immediately blames Namor, and by blaming, I mean he knocks him out first and then asks questions later. Okay, Reed, chill. Eventually, he becomes a villain in this universe, referring to himself as the Maker, and caused some trouble in the 616 universe as well, after his universe was destroyed. Now, this is the Mr. Fantastic that we need. This guy gets the job done. He's scary. Number 3, Wolverine. Making his first appearance in Ultimate X-Men issue 1, he didn't remember his past, and he thinks that he was once married. He has a ring, and he thinks Sabretooth killed his family. It's all a blur. Stressful. No thanks to Weapon X. Now, Ultimate James Howlett is actually the first mutant, and it turns out that this time around, you can kill Wolverine. You just have to rip his bones out that happen to have adamantium built into it. That ought to do it. Also, so painful. This all takes place during the Fatal Attractions event, and Wolverine doesn't even have a chance to scream. The adamantium that bonded to his bones erupted outward like water bursting through a dam. There's a nice picture for you. And he's still breathing when this happens. I mean, if this isn't one of the worst things to go through, I don't know what is. Number 2, Thor. Making his first entry in the Ultimates with issue 4, Thor Odinson actually looks a lot like our current MCU Thor, and I think he might have more in common than we think. For starters, the Ultimate Thor needs a magic belt to have powers, and in Spider-Man Homecoming, Happy mentions Thor's magic belt and all the stuff that they're packing up on Moving Day. So Thor just might need this come Love and Thunder, but in the comics, Loki was convincing everybody that Thor is just an insane dude with a magic belt. And they kind of bought it. What happens was he wasn't worthy yet, so he got his ass kicked, and then finally in Ultimates 2, issue 12, he gets his powers back. But the fact that this Thor went through all that to begin with, so sad. Definitely so sad. Number 1, Quicksilver. Okay, yeah, he's in love with his sister in the Ultimates, and it's weird, and it's gross. Yeah, sure. But this Quicksilver otherwise was far more superior. He was faster in the Ultimate Universe, he was supersonic when it comes to speeds. He almost reached the speed of light at one point, like, come on, dude. And as long as he's still alive, he can always re-heal himself. In Ultimate Wolverine issue 3, Pietro grabs Logan and runs with him. He was actually trying to tear the flesh off him, and if it was anybody else but Wolverine, it probably would have worked. And in Ultimate Comics 29, he heals himself using his super fast metabolism, and he uses his super speed to study Reed Richards' notes. He says he's not smart, but he is fast, so he ran the math nearly 100,000 times. That's insane. Quicksilver needs a comeback for sure, more so on screen than I think any superhero right now. Hashtag Ralph Bone.
Number 10, Marvel Zombies. I wouldn't say I hate Marvel Zombies by any means, but it is a world that I'm often reluctant to visit. And yet, here I go, talking about it again. Thank you so much for this, Ultimates. Thank you. I love talking about Marvel Zombies. The alternate universe of Marvel Zombies was actually introduced in the Ultimate line. We learned of this alternate reality when the Fantastic Four of 1610 would be forced into a confrontation with the reality-hopping zombie versions of themselves from Earth Z, aka 2149, who first appeared in Ultimate Fantastic Four in issue 21. Marvel Zombies is a pretty cool idea for an alternate Marvel world, to be honest, especially in the early 2000s when zombies were all the rage with the success of both The Walking Dead and Shaun of the Dead. Honestly, I really love Shaun of the Dead. I think it's one of my favorite movies. However, Marvel Zombies has also now been done to death, or undeath if you will. Often I found it zombie stories suffer from feeling the need to use excessive gore in order to sell us. Like sometimes happens with the Ultimates. There are times when it feels as though it's just all about shocking the readers. And I don't mind being shocked, but I like being shocked when it's like for a purpose, not just being shocked because be shocked by comics, you know what I mean? Number 9, Jean Grey and Wolverine's son. I gotta say, I don't mind Jean Grey becoming a villain in stories, but there are some strange things that go on with her character in terms of motivations on Earth 1610 that do bother me. A big one being the flirty moments that we see between her and Wolverine's son, Jimmy Hudson. For those who aren't aware, Jimmy was the son of Wolverine who was raised by a war buddy of Logan's and his family. Jimmy wouldn't learn until he was older of his true heritage and the fact that he was Logan's biological son. On Earth 1610, Jean Grey spent some time initially dating Wolverine Wolverine before she ended up with Cyclops, and of course before Wolverine died. Cyclops actually also later dies. Jean just can't catch a break, I guess, in terms of her partner staying alive. Her being the former lover of Wolverine, though, is what makes so many of her flirtatious moments with Jimmy so uncomfortable and weird. He's the son of her ex. Like, what is happening? Also, maybe not everybody got those vibes, but I definitely got those vibes, and I want to be like, what's going on? And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving these lists, all the parts of them, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. I know sometimes in fandoms we love to hate things, and I feel like that's sometimes what these lists are about. But that's okay. It can be fun, as long as it's all in good fun, and we can respect the cool stuff that we know about in the comics as well. Number 8, character motivations. Another thing that seemed to happen in the world of Ultimates was that some characters' motivations seemed to, make less sense than in 616. There were characters who were deemed evil for no real reason, or people who won fights without much explanation or justification for how they beat down someone who was kind of intended to be at their level or possibly above it. A lot of people wished others ill for strange reasons or did things that completely betrayed what they claimed to believe in. Of course, hypocrisy in the world is a very real thing, but I'm not sure we see hypocrisy every day that is quite at the level of what we saw with some characters in Ultimates. Number 7, Giant Man eats the Blob. Everybody is eating everybody in Ultimates. I don't know what it is with this world and cannibalism. I guess to be like really edgy, that is one of the final ingredients that you need. I don't know. And you gotta have it in spades, I guess. On part 1, we talked about how Blob was caught devouring the Wasp, and in revenge for the Blob's actions, Hank decided to give him a taste of his own medicine when he found him. As Giant Man, Hank pays the Blob back in kind by killing him through, you guessed it, eating him, biting off his head, clean off. Ugh. Or well, it doesn't look too clean, but you know what I mean. The other awful thing about this gruesome death is that it doesn't really give us even enough time to process the awfulness that was Janet being eaten just like a few moments ago. The story just rushes us through to the next like excessively violent and vengeful moment. And friends, if you occasionally love to hate things, and I know you do, this is fandoms, this is what we do sometimes. We lovingly hate things. Be sure to show that love to hate by giving this video a thumbs up. Thank you so much if you've already done it. It really does help us out, so thank you. Number 6, death of Cyclops. Quicksilver ends up assassinating Cyclops because he wants to carry on in his father's footsteps. No, Quicksilver, no! Did you not just see what happened during Ultimatum? It wasn't good. We do not need more hardcore Magneto. It was a mess. The other thing that was really weird about this death is that it didn't really lead to anything for Quicksilver. He said he wanted to follow in his father's footsteps, continue his dad's work, create a new brotherhood, but nothing big really ever comes of this. Like, I mean, he creates a new brotherhood, but it's just like a lot of running around without much going on. There's no through line here for this narrative. Number 5, Mr. Sinister. Like, I know Mr. Sinister is kind of a crazy dude, but I feel like we made him crazy in a less interesting way here in Ultimates, if that makes sense. Instead of being obsessed with evolution and teaming up with Apocalypse in order to improve himself, adopting the name Sinister because it's what his wife called him, Nathaniel Essex was instead someone who worked at Oscorp working on a potential new super soldier serum. Because in Ultimates, everything comes back to super soldiers. Now, I personally feel that Mr. Sinister is lesser than in comparison to his 616 counterpart, who is both fabulous, wicked, ruthless, and strangely sane for someone who is so deranged. He's both sane and insane at the same time. I don't know how he does it. But what really irks me is how downplayed and modernized Sinister's look is here in Ultimates. I have 3 words: needs more capes. Number 4, Ultron loves Wanda? One of the weirdest things to happen in Ultimates was when it was actually just a straight up thing that Ultron loved Wanda. Some people have theorized even in the MCU that Vision only loves Wanda because Ultron did, but me, personally, I like to try and distance myself as far as possible from this really weird and strange plot when it comes to theories. I'm not saying that robots don't deserve love. They do deserve love. But in Ultron's case, maybe Maybe they don't. I don't know. Ultron saw Pietro as a major competitor for Wanda's affections. For more on that, see part 1 of this list. And when Ultron realized he couldn't have her, he decided no one would, killing her instead. He killed her because he loved her. This excuse, in my mind, never makes for a great love story or plot, by the way. Don't kill people because you love them. What is that? What is that? Number 3, World War X. I mean, this as an idea on paper seems pretty cool, but where it falls apart is, well, pretty much at the beginning. The whole issue is that the reason for these two groups wanting to actually go to war just doesn't really feel, I don't know, justified. Basically what goes down here is you have Kitty Pryde ruling over Utopia and Jean Grey ruling over Xi'an, or Tian. Not sure if I'm saying that right, but I promise I'm trying. It isn't even really explained how Jean Grey came to be the one in power. She was just appointed to take over by the surviving Zorn brother who died somehow, I think? I don't know what happened there. Jean wants Utopia and Xi'an to become one mutant nation, but Kitty isn't interested in joining. Jean says she doesn't want a war, but insists that Kitty started it, so now there has to be one, even though she doesn't want one? All because Kitty killed some androids left to her by the Zorn brothers. Yeah. And from there, it just gets more ridiculous and weird. I like the idea of a mutant versus mutant faction fight, but this was a weird one. I think you gotta really make it justified, like with Cyclops versus Wolverine, when they kind of had like two different ideologies on how to approach leadership. And then it was like, which team are you? That makes sense to me. Number 2, extreme domestic dispute. Hank Pym and Janet Van Dyne have always had a troubled marriage in the comics. Ever since that fateful panel where Hank dramatically and intentionally struck Janet, Hank has been thought of as a troubled man who is more inclined to hurt the ones he loves and thus drives them away. This panel was intended by editor Jim Shooter to actually be redrawn, as he felt the moment should actually be an accident, not something intentional. However, they ran out of time to redo it, and to this day, this action has haunted the character of Hank Pym. So much so that on Earth 1610, it was simply imagined of how much worse he could possibly be to poor Janet. They were like, how worse can this get? Here she tries to stand by Hank even after their relationship gets really rough. It gets really bad when she and Hank end up in a fight with one another, with Janet using her powers against him. While she is shrunk down, Hank then sends his army of ants after her, almost killing Janet as she goes into anaphylactic shock from all the ant stings and bites. It's just terrible. Number 1, blood and gore. Another issue that people had with the Ultimate Universe? Just all the blood and gore that we saw here. And more specifically, all the needless blood and gore. The Ultimate Universe took violence to a new level. And while I'm actually a fan of a gory scene when it holds meaning, many felt that much of what we saw was gratuitous. It was there for the shock factor. Like some of the Marvel Max series that we got, it was more about shocking readers than using the violence or gore to say something really important. There are examples of this littered throughout Ultimates, from Natasha's brutal death at the hands of Hawkeye, not that she didn't deserve it, who pinned her to the wall with arrows, to heads exploding, decapitation, and of course, just lots of cannibalism. Nothing was too gruesome, it seemed, for the Earth of 1610. Number 10, Tony and Natasha. Yep, in the Ultimate Universe of Earth 1610, Iron Man and Black Widow are an item. But what's worse, Black Widow turns out to be working as a double agent and betrays the team in Ultimates 2. Turns out she was working with the Liberators. This all happens just as Tony and Natasha are preparing to tie the knot. Fortunately, Tony is able to apprehend Natasha, stop her, and turn her over to the authorities, but not before she manages to kill his longtime butler and friend, Jarvis, and get all of Hawkeye's family killed and him captured. Tony finds himself distraught, and matters are made even worse after Black Widow's capture and later on her death, when a very intimate and personal video the two made together is leaked to the public. Yikes. Number 9, actual cannibal Hulk. Hulk in the Ultimate Universe was a much more gruesome version of himself. He was depicted as being a lot more violent, even killing people when he went into a rage. However, this is the Ultimate, so even this more violent and uncontrolled take on his character was not enough. Hulk wouldn't just lose control and kill people, he also had a habit of eating the people he killed as well. I mean, I know he's meant to be a monstrous figure even on Earth 616, but it feels like they took it a little too far here. Also, what's up with the Ultimate Universe and cannibalism? That's like a thing that just keeps coming up. Number 8, one true enemy of the great Charles Xavier. Stairs! It was something that hadn't really been done when it came to defeating Professor X, throwing him down some stairs. But there was also probably a reason for this, because I mean, it's just not a thing that needs to happen in the comics, and yet nothing was considered off the table in Ultimates. This is the moment, by the way, that is featured in our thumbnail for this video, and you might be wondering, hold on, wait a minute, is that Wolverine throwing Charles down the stairs? And fear not, true believer, at least they didn't steep that low. That's actually Mr. Sinister, and yeah, he looks a little different in the Ultimate Universe. If you're like, but where's his cape and the things? And it looks different here. Number 7, Blue Tony. One of the weirdest things about Ultimates has to have been the initial origin story that we got for Tony Stark. Originally, Tony Stark was given a very different backstory from his 616 counterpart. He was born as one big brain. Due to his mother suffering from an accident while she was pregnant with him, his genetic makeup was affected and he developed neural tissue throughout his entire body. Hence why I say he's a big brain. Despite the fact that, you know, he appears human. So just to be clear, he doesn't look just like a big brain. He looks like a person, but he is a big brain, technically. Tony would evidently be hyper intelligent because of this alteration to his genetics, but he would also have hypersensitive skin. Even the air just touching him felt like intense burns all over his body. Because of this, his father created an armor for him to wear and to protect Tony and allow him to exist semi-normally. This liquid armor his father created also turned his skin blue, hence me calling this point Blue Tony, because he was blue. This version of Tony would get 2 miniseries, but his origins would end up being one of the many things to be retconned away. Number 6, retcons. Retcons on retcons on retcons. Would you like some retcons with that retcon? When it comes to Ultimate Universe, there are so many retcons, it can actually be hard to even keep up with all of them. And so many things were just so bizarre that we might not even remember them as existing. Never mind them being retconned out of existence. Seriously, with Ultimates, I really need that retcon button. Friends, I need a button at my desk that I can just smash every time I find a retcon, so I can have like a counter of all the ones. And never mind the retcons we may have forgotten, there are also the ones that we do remember, jarringly so, because they were never even justified or explained. The retcons that just randomly showed up and you were like, wait, what's happening now? Did I miss something? No, it was just never explained. Or the ones that their explanations were so strange and far-fetched that we simply struggle to remember them because we're like, that doesn't even make sense, so I'm not even gonna put that in my brain. There is, for example, Wanda, aka the Scarlet Witch's death, but then she came back to life, her brother Pietro's death, who also miraculously actually comes back to life. I don't even know if that one was ever explained. Black Panther becoming Steve Rogers, but then just going back to being Captain America without much explanation of what happened to T'Challa afterwards. We know he went home, and so it kind of gets a little fuzzy there. And of course, we just talked about Blue Tony as well. That origin was retconned actually to be the plot of an anime series based on Iron Man that existed in the universe. Because why not? I mean, at least that's a reason that could make sense. Although, if you owned all of those 2 miniseries that were Blue Tony, you'd be like, what did I buy? I bought something that's apparently about an anime now in the world. How would you feel about that? Number 5, dropped plots. Within Ultimates, there were also tons of covers and teases for plots that never really led us anywhere. Hulk was apparently going to join the X-Men, T'Challa was meant to join the Ultimates, but he randomly left and then he never really returned. Quicksilver intended to follow in his father's footsteps, but never really built to any great huge plot. Magneto was killed by Cyclops, but then randomly just shows back up again to console his son, and then I don't think we ever see him again after that, so that's confusing. Various covers teased at scenarios that simply never came to pass. And I'm not talking about alternate covers either, I am talking about main covers. Comic book covers are supposed to give us an indication of the story to come, the story that's inside the comic, a hint at something that exists within that issue. Not completely mislead us with promises of grandeur, showing us scenarios or team-ups that just never happen. And with Ultimates, this was sometimes simply the way. For a world that was meant to be made less confusing by the fact that it didn't have years of continuity to deal with, the Ultimate Universe became really messy pretty fast. Number 4, Kitty and MJ fight over Spider-Man. This whole fight in Ultimatum just, it kills me. While Peter Parker in 616 is often either shipped with Mary Jane Watson, Gwen Stacy, or Black Cat, Felicia Hardy, in 1610, he, for a time, dated Kitty Pryde, who was about the same age as Peter, so it makes sense, it's kind of cute. And the two also teamed up together fighting crime as supers, which also cute. However, Kitty and Peter wouldn't end up staying together, and eventually they would break up and he'd end up more predictably with MJ. Despite the fact that Kitty and Peter ended things pretty amicably. We see Kitty and MJ arguing over who loves Peter more during Ultimatum. Just another reason to consider Ultimatum one of the lowest points of the Ultimate line. There is something so annoying and so ridiculous about these two girls bickering over who really loves Peter the most, especially as the world is like falling apart around them. I'm like, what's happening? Why are we having this conversation right now? Why are we having this conversation at all? I guess it's also just like, I don't think that's what would be happening with these characters. In my mind, I don't believe it. Number 3, Jonathan Hickman. One of the worst things to happen to the Ultimate Universe would probably be Jonathan Hickman leaving it. But also, maybe just Jonathan Hickman in general. Hickman was one of the creatives called in to help revive the Ultimate line after it had been murked by Ultimatum. In the end, the creative paramedics would not be able to save it, despite breathing new and exciting life into it. In fact, years down the line, after Hickman had left Ultimates, he'd kind of also be the one to destroy it, with his Avengers run where we learn about the incursions and where eventually the Time Runs Out storyline would take place. However, the Ultimate line might be gone, but the Ultimate Universe would be brought back to life later on. In fact, actually, Hickman is still a huge Maker fan and even has been intertwining the 1610 version of Reed Richards' Children of Tomorrow into his current X-Men run and the world of X-Men with the Children of the Vault. So it's like a mixed bag with Jonathan Hickman. He's like the worst thing to have left, the worst thing to have happened because he killed it. But he also, obviously, I feel like he loves Ultimates. I feel like it does hold a special place in his heart because I feel like he loves a lot of the characters there. So, yeah, I don't know. I love it. Who doesn't love the Maker, though? Am I right? He's just so cool. Such a freaky guy. Number 2, Wolverine creeps on MJ. One of the weirdest things to happen in the Ultimate Universe takes place during a case of the body swaps. Wolverine and Spider-Man wake up one day in one another's bodies without any idea of how they got there. Just like in the main continuity reality of Earth 616, these two don't really get along in the Ultimate Universe. They end up discovering what happened and making contact with one another, planning to meet up and basically figure out like how to swap back or like what's going on. But after this all gets resolved, we also learn that Wolverine, who is not just an adult man, by the way, but potentially a super old adult man due to his healing factor, attempted, while in Peter's body, to make very intimate and adult moves on Mary Jane, Peter's girlfriend, who here is also a teenager. Ew! Like, I know you have a thing for redheads, bub, but stick to redheaded adults, not teenagers. Ugh. Gross. Number 1, Ultimate Doom. Doom was such a mess in the Ultimate Universe just because of all the ever-developing retcons about which Doom was the real Doom. Victor Van Dame was our Doom of Earth 1610, but we later learned that actions we believed were him were actually a Doom bot, and that he'd also actually been replaced for a time by Mary Storm. He was like basically going into alternate realities. It's a lot. If you thought Doom of Earth 616 with all of his Doom bots was confusing, the continuity here is, well, it's really only more of a mess in my mind, especially considering how some important actions were later retconned as not being caused by Doom, and how it became confusing going back to know like when Doom was actually the true Doom or when it had been an imposter in disguise. Did you get all of that? Yeah. Me neither. Number 10, Hawkeye. Clint Barton might often be thought of as a man who just runs around with a bow and some arrows, but the Ultimate Universe took his character to a whole new level. Hawkeye became more grounded in reality with a masterful archer who can shoot off 6 arrows faster than a human can fire 6 bullets. In this reality, he was also given enhanced vision, which allows him to see at an increased distance and granted him a better sense of contrast, as it's believed he sees more in black and white than in color. He was even implied to be able to see so well that he can use his eyes to tell him what is true and what is not. Pretty insane. Number 9, the real Black Panther. And if you're wondering why I'm saying the real one, because there was a time when Captain America was Black Panther in Ultimates, but that's a story for another time. Black Panther has a really different and kind of weird story in Ultimates. He actually ends up getting a similar treatment to Wolverine in this universe, joining the Weapon X program. Here, T'Challa is given Weapon X claws and has his general strength, speed, and stamina increased even further by the Weapon X program. In Ultimates, he also possesses a regenerative positive healing factor, and he is believed to be a mutant in terms of origins. Black Panther was given his code name by Weapon X, who gave him the name after helping to save his life after he fought a Black Panther in Wakanda to prove himself a viable leader as the second-born son of King T'Chaka. Yeah, in this reality, T'Challa is the second-born son. And actually, M'Baku is his older brother. Number 8, Doctor Strange. In theory, Doctor Strange's son, Stephen Strange Jr., also known as Doctor Strange, should likely not have died in the way that he did, considering how powerful he is. Although not as talented as his father, Strange was still a skilled magic user. It is implied, based on the artifacts that he holds and his place in the Sanctum Sanctorium, that despite his youth and his inexperience, he may have still held the title of Sorcerer Supreme in the reality of 1610, which should mean he's pretty powerful. Though, of course, this is never really confirmed, so. Strange manages to defeat Nightmare when he possesses Spider-Man, teams up with Ultimate Knights in a fight against Kingpin, but ultimately is defeated and brutally killed by Dormammu, who strangles him with his own cloak and constricts him until his head explodes. It's pretty violent and pretty dark. Despite his gruesome death, Strange was still considered to be a powerful magic user and also possessed telepathic abilities besides. While he went by the name of Doctor Strange, he himself was not a licensed or practicing medical doctor. He was the son of Doctor Strange and Clea. Number 7, Liberators. Okay, so don't get me wrong, I like the idea of the Liberators. It was more the way that this all went down with them in the end, and the way that these international heroes, but villains to the Ultimates, were portrayed. The Liberators were a team of superpowered folks from around the globe who had come together to defeat the Ultimates so as to even the playing field on a global level for the rest of the world. Basically, these characters thought that the USA was becoming too powerful and was messing things up for other countries with their superhero team. This could have been an interesting story, actually, in terms of like global international politics, but instead it just became about how every other country was inferior to the US, with their heroes, the Ultimates, winning the day simply because they were kind of deemed superior. And I'm pretty sure there's a line in there that communicates almost verbatim that sentiment. Number 6, Black Panther is Steve Rogers? There is a time that Black Panther is Steve Rogers in these comics. What went down is that basically Black Panther was recruited to the Ultimates but didn't really want to join the team. I mean, that's a whole other story that is pretty weird and problematic. He was kind of made to join the team against his will. On Nick Fury's orders, Black Panther, however, was also not allowed to leave or ever return to his home and see his family in Wakanda. Steve had been training Black Panther and he felt bad for T'Challa, so he decided to basically take Black Panther's place so that he could return home to visit his family. Temporarily, of course. At least, it seemed as though the sub-in was meant to be something temporary. It was implied in the comics that Black Panther would basically go visit his family for a while, and then he'd return to relieve Steve. That isn't what happened, though, and instead Steve remained as Black Panther until eventually he just went back to being Captain America again, and Black Panther sort of seemingly disappeared off the team without any explanation. He does come back, I think, for one mission, and then he quits. But, yeah, it's also kind of weird that he quits. I guess things changed and he could quit at that point? Yeah, it's strange. Another one of the strangest moments in terms of this story is when Janet Van Dyne, the Wasp, seemingly recognizes that Steve is actually Black Panther because of the way he moves. Apparently no one else can move like Steve Rogers. Number 5, Blob eats the Wasp. During the events of Ultimatum, a lot of awful things went down. One of those things was the death of the Wasp, Janet Van Dyne. She was for a time the leader of the Ultimates and actually proved to be a quite capable, resourceful, and powerful member of the team, but none of that could save her from the Ultimate Wave. Janet was one of the heroes to be killed during the Ultimate Wave, and her body was found by Hawkeye and Giant Man. The worst part wasn't even that she died, but instead was the aftermath of that. Hawkeye and Giant Man found the Wasp's corpse, which was being violently torn apart and eaten by the Brotherhood member, the Blob. Ew. Why so much cannibalism, though? Number 4, Magneto kills everyone. Normally, I wouldn't have a problem with Magneto killing people. After all, he's a major X-Men villain, and to have Magneto tell the story, most of the people that he kills, they deserve it. They themselves are usually murderers in some way. It's what makes him such a compelling villain, and at times an anti-hero. Right now, he's gone full hero in the comics, which means that he really holds people up to high standards in Krakoa when it comes to their law about not killing humans. After all, he knows what it's like to feel justified in disposing of human enemies, and even he is willing to agree that overall it's just a bad idea. So there's really no way of finding justification if that's your crime in Krakoa right now. In Ultimates, Magneto, however, goes from being Professor X's friend and partner in mutant team building and safe space creating to thinking that mutants are basically better than humans and believing that humans should either serve mutants or completely be exterminated. Does believing that you belong to a superior race sound like anything else to you? Magneto kills billions of people in the pursuit of this belief, which, considering his history as a victim and survivor of the camps in World War II, is pretty shocking and feels out of character. And if you're wondering, well, is that still a thing in Ultimates? Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's still established in Ultimates, so yeah. Number 3, Wanda and Pietro. Initially, Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver had a similar relationship to their 616 counterparts, with Pietro being established as just an overprotective brother. Ultimates then took this a step further, with it being kind of a joke that they were maybe like a little too close, with them even being presented as being overly flirty with one another. But eventually, this was then taken to the next level. A level we probably never should have gone to, where the brother and sister duo were in a full-blown romantic and intimate relationship with one another, and Wolverine even caught them being intimate. And this was something that many fans felt was taking their relationship way, way, way too far. Pietro even is considered a rival when it comes to anyone else competing for Wanda's affections. I love how Earth 1610 was about trying completely different things with characters, and yet the close siblings were simply just like brought too close together. I mean, they could have done something really different with these two and made them like two estranged siblings or people that were like unrelated to each other. That's something that would really be breaking new ground. Like, where's my story where they were like split up at birth and so they like never knew about the other one and then they find their long lost twin? That could be a cool story. Number 2, Ultimates 3. Many of these worst moments that have been laid out before you today come to us from Ultimates 3, which is where the wheels really began to fall off the Ultimates train. I mean, Ultimates 2 also had its problems, but I don't know if there were quite as many as Ultimates 3. Ultimates would later be relaunched by Jonathan Hickman and Asad Ribish in hope to save it, but the damage had already been done. The line was doomed to die and would die during the incursions, with the worlds colliding and being rolled into one giant ball of fun that we'd come to know as Doom's Battle World. Of course, then later it'd be brought back, so nah. Number 1, Ultimatum. What could possibly be worse than a brother and sister in a romantic relationship and Ultimates 3, where many problematic stories either got worse or got started? How about the thing that simply straight up killed the Ultimate Universe, or at least felt like it tried to? Ultimatum. Ultimatum was the crossover event that caused mass devastation to the universe and the world, wiping out many of the characters that we'd come to know and love, or at the very least tolerate. Jeff Loeb was basically given the green light by Marvel to kill off all characters who were too similar to their Earth 616 counterparts to really shake up the Ultimate Universe. What ended up happening as a result was many people, heroes, and villains dying due to their heads being blown up or torn off, having an overly gruesome and violent end. Then there were deaths that were never even shown of major characters who died in the Ultimate Wave. And finally, there were also tons of characters whose corpses were eaten after or during their death, or who ended up tortured to death. It was just an overly violent mess of an event with death after death, till you became just basically numb to what was going on. Ultimatum is also the event where Magneto decided to basically go nuts and kill billions of people. He would snap Professor X's neck and then would later have his own head blown off by Cyclops' optic blasts. Like I said, just so many heads being blown off. It makes my head want to explode. Number 10, She-Hulk. In Ultimates, Jennifer Walters is not She-Hulk, Betty Ross is. She ended up stealing the formula that would cause her transformation from Walters, who here is a doctor and scientist instead. Betty needed the formula to try and save Bruce Banner, the Hulk, who Nick Fury had sent Wolverine to assassinate. Betty had tried everything else she could think of to interfere with Fury's plans, and this was the only option really left to her. Stealing the formula, she was pursued, but injected it in time, becoming the Jade Giantess She-Hulk. The serum made it so that rage was not a part of the transformation, meaning that Betty got to keep her wits and maintain a sense of level-headedness while transformed. She would end up pursuing the Hulk and reconnect with him, but the two would ultimately end up fighting one another. Afterwards, She-Hulk found herself defeated by Wolverine and was later taken in by S.H.I.E.L.D., only apprehended likely because Wolverine made her wear a collar that basically prevented her from transforming. Number 9. Miles Morales. One of my favorite characters to come from 1610, we have Spider-Man, aka Miles Morales. Miles was so powerful in terms of his popularity that he was one of the few characters to survive the destruction of Earth 1610. He ended up moving over to Earth 616, given a place there once the world was reconstructed by Molecule Man and Reed Richards in the Fantastic Four. Molecule Man actually ended up saving Miles because he ended up giving him a burger when he was hungry. Gotta love those pocket burgers. In a way, it's always been Miles' quirkiness and kindness that has remained one of his greatest strengths. But aside from that, he's also one of the most powerful Spider-Men, or spider folk, around. He not only has the proportional strength of a spider, making him super strong, but can also camouflage his body to match his surroundings, rendering him pretty much invisible to the untrained eye, and comes with his Venom Blast, which allows him to deal devastating electrical shocks to his opponents. Now, every time I say Venom Blast, I just think of the Jessica Drew Spider-Woman cartoon from the 70s. Oh my goodness, Venom Blast. Number 8, Invisible Woman. Sue would end up in the ultimate reality married to Ben Grimm, but initially would fall for Reed, just like in the Earth 616 reality. She would also stay loyal to him for quite some time, despite the fact that, like on Earth 616, he tended to become obsessed with science to the point of, well, kind of ignoring her. Sue herself was also a genius and ended up with 4 doctorates in biochemical science before she entered her 20s. She possesses an IQ of 170, not far off from Tony Stark in this reality. Her powers allow her to turn invisible, generate force fields and shields. She can use these shields to protect defensively or to destroy and attack offensively. Many times, Sue has used her abilities to save her teammates' lives. Number 7, Carnage, aka Gwen Stacy, or really more specifically Gwen Stacy's clone, I should say. Gwen ended up being killed by Carnage, and during that process was in a way also kind of reborn through the symbiote. You can tell the OG version of Gwen Stacy from the Ultimates apart from the later appearing clone from the line by looking at the color of her eyes. Gwen originally had hazel eyes in this universe, but her cloned version, who was also for a time Carnage, had blue eyes. Although in her Carnage form, her eyes became white, of course. Well, you might not think of Carnage as a hero here due to its history on Earth 616 and its origins as a symbiote here, as well as its attachment to Gwen. It was kind of a mash between a heroic and villainous entity, so it wasn't really a villain here. During her time as Carnage, Gwen possessed powers similar to Peter Parker's Spider-Man. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are enjoying this list and you want more Ultimates lists, please let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Also, thank you. It really helps us out when you do that, so thanks. Number 6, Peter Parker. Sure, he died, but he was still pretty strong regardless, and he only died twice. Also, don't get me wrong, I do not wish for the death of Peter, but in general, I'm just kind of glad that death itself was a thing in the Ultimate Universe. It meant actions and stories had, you know, actual consequences. I mean, sort of. Peter kind of died twice, and he didn't stay dead. The more memorable death to me is the one where he died in a brutal fight against the Sinister Six, working to protect those he loved while also watching as they did their part to protect him as well. Oh my goodness! It was actually a really beautiful conclusion for the hero, with him finally accepting that while he couldn't save his Uncle Ben, at least he could save the other people in his life whom he loved. It was like a really heartbreaking moment. But then, of course, later on, Peter was resurrected, which I guess for the purpose of this list makes him even more powerful as Spider-Man because he came back from the dead. But it also kind of ruined the whole story of his death for me. So, Number 5, Nick Fury. Fury ranks so high on this list because, well, he's kind of in charge of many different superpowered characters and knows what buttons to push to get them to do his bidding and make them work for him. Fury was the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. in the Ultimate Universe and was also exposed to the Super Soldier Serum as well, which gave him enhanced strength, durability, speed, and enhanced healing on the same level as Captain America. His healing factor, of course, was not strong enough to regenerate his eye, which remained gone pretty much forever. Even without insane superpowers, this version of Fury is not someone you'd want to mess with, as he also has some of the most powerful tech at his disposal, which can do things like allow him to walk on air and turn invisible. Number 4, The Thing. In this reality, the Thing and Susan Storm, the Invisible Woman, end up together, with Susan leaving Reed Richards to be with Ben. Ben Grimm was mutated after exposure to the End Zone, turning into a rock-like monster creature. However, later on in the Earth 1610 universe, he would gain the ability to actually change form at will after experiencing a secondary mutation, which also gave him his purple form. As such, he can switch between human form and rock form. While in his rock form, Ben is super strong. As a result of his mutation, he also had enhanced durability and endurance. He can withstand extremely hot and extremely cold temperatures as well for a short amount of time. Ben is actually considered to be so strong and massive in his rock form that he has to wear a containment suit. Otherwise, each step that he takes would actually cause destruction within his nearby vicinity. That is just how powerful he is. Number 3, the Hulk. While the Thing has beat the Hulk in the Ultimate Universe before, I still think he's a little more powerful, though not nearly as powerful as his Earth 616 counterpart. I feel like one of the things that we also need to consider about Ultimate Hulk is how many times he's been boosted up in the Ultimate Universe. One of his weaknesses is adamantium, which is strong enough when sharpened or enough force is applied to pierce the Hulk's thick skin. But if Hulk gets angry enough, even this won't work on him. And he also at one point to himself is bonded with adamantium, so Hulk also received a power boost from Galactus, and at one point wielded an incomplete set of the Ultimate Infinity Gauntlets, giving him another power boost. Hulk was initially a member of the Ultimates, but would later on end up serving on the Maker's Dark Ultimates team. Number 10, Blackheath. Blackheath is Samuel Smithers. Yep, in the reality of 1610, Plant Man is instead a mutant. His powers are similar to that of Poison Ivy, allowing him to control plant life. Blackheath was one of the mutants who was kept in William Stryker's camps. While there, he ended up meeting and befriending Storm, and would be one of the few mutants left when Utopia came about. Number 9, Mach 2. Mach 2 is Nomi Bloom. She is kind of like the second coming of Magneto, but not as much of a villain. Or at least, she comes around in the end. And not inherently as powerful as Magneto was. She can basically affect and control magnetic fields. Later on, she would see a power boost, which would enable her to have more control over objects containing metal. Mach 2 is also known for being a rival to Kitty in terms of her leadership over the surviving mutants of Utopia. People are gonna be like, what is Utopia? And I'm gonna be like, don't worry. We're getting to that much later, but it's coming. It's slowly you'll get little bits of information. Number 8, Zorn. In the reality of Earth 1610, Zorn is actually Zorn, but is not the only version of Zorn. Wow, that sounded confusing. What I mean to say is that Zorn is his own person, Kuan Yin, but has a sibling who is also named Zorn, but with a Z. They were each given their powers as part of the Southeast Asian Republic's Super Soldier program. Zorn with an X is the one who you typically see clad in the color white. He is an amazingly powerful telepath and telekinetic. While both characters may have been introduced later and have been somewhat short-lived, they are both presented as being pretty powerful during their time in the comics. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 7, Zorn. This is the sibling I was telling you about. Zorn with a Z or a Z is Shen Yin, the brother of Zorn with an X. His powers are much darker in nature. It's actually believed in the comics that Zorn and Zorn were sort of destined to bring a sense of balance to the world and mutant kind, symbolically sort of representing yin and yang, black and white. Zorn's powers are basically akin to a black hole. He emits a black hole energy and can use his powers to manipulate gravity. In the end, Zorn sacrifices himself when he realizes that he cannot win in the war against the children of tomorrow. In his death, he effectively becomes a black hole in retaliation. Number 6, Gregory Stark. Gregory Stark is the twin brother of Tony Stark. He has less morals than his brother and is a more focused intellectual. Whereas Tony is known for his lavish playboy lifestyle, Gregory is not. In fact, that is one of the many things that Gregory always hated about his brother. He is the older twin, being born 20 minutes before Tony, and is not only more amoral, but is also more intelligent than his brother. Initially, he worked for S.H.I.E.L.D., but this was all part of a carefully planned world domination plot involving in part the overthrowing of S.H.I.E.L.D. superiors, leading eventually to Gregory being put in charge as director of S.H.I.E.L.D. Eventually, the Ultimates would learn of his plot and turn on him, defeating and killing him after the nanites in his bloodstream were disabled by his own brother, Tony. Number 5, Modi Thorson. Modi is the son of Thor and Hela. Don't worry, in Ultimates they're not related. Not brother and sister, nor uncle and niece. Still, it's kind of icky to imagine, but Thor was forced to sleep with Hela in order to give her a child so that in exchange she would return him to Earth so that he could be with Valkyrie. Of course, this didn't end up working out exactly as Thor had planned, because Valkyrie ended up dying and then Thor ended up coming back, so they didn't really get to be together, but hey, good try. When Modi was a child, Thor locked him away for his own protection, but gave him Mjolnir so that he'd be able to escape when he was worthy. After escaping the room he was locked up in, now fully grown, Modi ended up using the Mind Gem to bend others to his will. His plan was to destroy the US and basically rebuild Asgard out of its charred remains, because at this point in time, Asgard had fallen, there was no Asgard. Modi even managed to bend his father to his will, but was not successful in controlling the mind of Captain America. In the end, Thor broke free of his son's will and killed him. Number 4, Green Goblin. Of course, Norman Osborn needs to be near the top on this list because, well, he's Norman Osborn. But in the reality of Earth 1610, he's actually even more fearsome than his 616 counterpart. Norman got his powers after learning of the creation of Spider-Man through an Oz formula infected spider. Believing that it was the combination of the Oz formula and spider DNA that granted those spider-like abilities, Norman theorized that combining the Oz formula with his own DNA should just transform him into a more superior version of himself. Unfortunately, it didn't quite work out how he planned, and instead, Norman found himself transformed into a demon-like version of himself. This version of Norman comes with super strength, speed, durability, and is virtually indestructible and immortal, in a way that's similar to the Hulk. Every time he dies, Osborn claims he is resurrected. Osborn would also eventually make his way to the universe of Earth 616. But how did he get there? Number 3, Ultimatum. Ultimatum is like the evil version of Miles Morales, but is actually the main continuity version of that character. While he isn't originally from Earth 1610, instead hailing from the Prime Universe of Earth 616, Miles Morales did spend a good amount of time living on Earth 1610. And I mean, his current villain name is Ultimatum, so I feel like he kind of earned a place on our list. Miles was the one responsible for bringing the 1610 version of Norman Osborn to Earth 616, who works for him as his lackey, hence why Ultimatum is higher up on this list. Ultimatum himself doesn't have any superpowers, but does have quite a bit of influence, being an ally of Earth 616's Kingpin originally, and also possesses knowledge of the multiverse. I keep pointing to my head for knowledge. It's just like, yes, Amanda, we know this is where your brain is. We know. Ultimatum also has a pretty sweet suit. Like a supervillain suit, not like a tailored suit. His plan was to take over Brooklyn, make it his own criminal empire, and send the Miles Morales of Earth 1610, Spider-Man, and his family back to their home reality. Fortunately, his plan fell apart in issue 19 of Miles Morales Spider-Man, when he found out he was unable to capture Spider-Man's parents. They're not easy to capture, so I love that he was like, this will work fine. But Jefferson was like, no, get out of here. What are you trying to do? Get out of here. Number 2, Magneto. Speaking of Ultimatum. Okay, so while Green Goblin is mortal and Ultimatum is the boss of Green Goblin, and Magneto is, not necessarily immortal, definitely not immortal, he still has proven to be very deadly in the Ultimate Universe, and it is for that reason that he gets ranked so high up. Just the numbers of lives he took is shocking during, of course, Ultimatum. Magneto killed Professor Xavier and other notable mutant heroes who stood in his way. He killed millions of people worldwide before S.H.I.E.L.D. and the X-Men were able to finally track him down and put a stop to it. Magneto then learned that his beliefs about mutant kind were wrong, and that mutants were created from the hereditary genes passed on from the super soldier serum. They weren't like divine in any way. This broke Magneto, destroying everything he had built his cause around, making him question everything he had done, as he should. In the end, Cyclops killed Magneto, vaporizing him with a powerful optic blast. See? Not immortal. Number 1, the Maker. Likely one of the most powerful and brilliant villains to come out of the Ultimate Universe. Jonathan Hickman, if you're watching this, you know what I'm talking about. The Maker is also a fan favorite among comic book writers and readers, so it's easy to understand how he ends up accomplishing so much and becoming so gifted. When we like a character, we want them to do well. When we like a villain, we want them to do bad. Do bad things. To other people, that is. And the Maker in that way does not disappoint us. Initially, the Maker was known as Mr. Fantastic. He is the reimagining of Reed Richards if he were to turn to a life of villainy instead, which ends up happening after the Fantastic Four falls apart. Much of his power comes from his genius intellect and his fiercely and horrifically loyal dedication to the pursuit of knowledge and science. The Maker has his own modified symbiote, is virtually immortal, possesses a genius intellect, and still has his stretching powers. And he's done a lot of stuff. It's pretty crazy.
Number 10, Origins. Why not start at the beginning? Let's do it. Ultimate James Howlett first appeared in Ultimate X-Men issue 1 back in 2001. Now his combat days began as a paratrooper for the Canadian Army during World War II. He was part of the invasion of Sicily, and funny enough, that's actually where he met Private Nick Fury and Private Fisk. Now Fisk got hit by a bullet, and then the three of them were all taken away. They were captured, even though James was from a different unit. He was from Canada. He just got roped into it. So that's where they all got put into the Weapon X complex and were under experimentation by Dr. Abraham Cornelius. Now luckily, James got out of there. The other two though, they were tested on to become this new Captain America. They were the test subjects of the new serum. But if you want to hear more of that Ultimate side, check out one of our playlists. We explain quite a bit of it. So yeah, in the Ultimates, Nick Fury is a super soldier. How cool is that? But Wolverine got out of there. He didn't want to be part of it. Well, he kind of got out of there. He got really close until a stray bullet hit him last second, and then everybody was in shock as he healed himself. So they dragged him right back in and they're like, well, we got to do some tests. What's going on here? So we got this mutant ability down the road, whereas main Wolverine was just born a mutant. So key difference right there. Number 9. Mutant Zero. So Dr. Cornelius was super into this guy, and then during these experiments, because obviously they wanted to pick him apart and see what the hell just happened, during these experiments they discovered this gene that when it's activated, gives you superpowers, basically. So he came up with the term for them. He called them mutants, which is a great word, gotta admit. And James Howlett was mutant number 1. Well, actually, Mutant Zero was his term. Now the genome was spread around the planet over time, causing a few more mutants to pop around, just a few of them. And also those scientists who like to experiment on James and others, they got what was coming eventually. Because a mutant boy down the road had some Weapon X scientists as parents, and when he found out how they were treating James and others, well, he took out both of his parents and set James free. Yeah, that little boy was Magneto. The Ultimates are sick. And before we continue on with this list, if you want to go ahead and give this video a thumbs up, that would be really helpful for us. Or if you're feeling good today, maybe you want to hit that subscribe button. I mean, no pressure, but it's right there. Thank you so much. Let's get right back to the video. Number 8, Weapon X. So yeah, that whole thing with Eric was a big deal, but Wolverine was actually recaptured later on, this time by Colonel John Wraith, who was not fond of mutants at this point. There were a few of them and he was like, okay, this has gotten out of hand. And at this point, John was also the new head of the Weapon X program. So they wiped Wolverine's memory and gave him the name Logan. And this is where things got real for James, more real than before. This is when he was tortured. The other guy who was there, who was also getting tortured, his name was Victor Creed. And Victor was getting on his nerves the whole time. And this was when the adamantium was bonded to Logan's skeleton. So a lot of things happened during this time as well at Weapon X. So he was a mindless brute, and things took a turn one mission when he was deployed in the desert during the Gulf War. The truck got ambushed and Wolverine was let loose. This insane, mindless mutant weapon. No big deal at all. So he wiped out everybody. He took out every single member except for one guy, Nick Fury. He didn't take him out. He saved his life and carried him all the way to base because part of him still remembered meeting him early on in his life. Nick Fury actually recognized him as well and then came back later to set him free. What goes around comes around. Number 7. Brotherhood of Mutant Supremacy. So Magneto, of course, becomes an evil ruler in this universe as well, and he and Charles once shared a dream about creating a safe haven for mutants called the Savage Land. But a few arguments later and a pole in the spine, and now Charles is in a wheelchair, they're not talking anymore. So now Magneto is full-on villain, and he creates this Brotherhood of Mutant Supremacy, and his first idea was to recruit Wolverine and attack the Pentagon. And that Savage Land ends up becoming the new evil headquarters, not a paradise. So Magneto wanted to take out Charles for good this time, not just paralyze him. He wanted him gone, so he sent Wolverine to get the job done. So Wolverine was undercover the entire time. Quicksilver actually almost blew it at one point, but Wolverine came through and impressed the X-Men.
Number 6, Black Bolt. Black Bolt is already menacing over on Earth 616, at least I would say in modern comics he is, but on Earth 1610, he is really menacing. We see Black Bolt for an even shorter time than Crystal, but honestly it only adds to the mystery of the character, making him appear more intimidating. The colors by Jun Chung during his appearance in Ultimate Fantastic Four Annual Issue number 1 really help the character to pop as well, and the pencils by Jay Lee also add to the presence of his appearance. He might not say much, but he really doesn't need to here. This is a very muscular, dark, and yet blindingly bright Black Bolt, with the white lines of his costume reminding me of lightning. Black Bolt simply appears basically to destroy Atalan so they might find a new secret home, as their current one in the Himalayas has been revealed to the FF, and it's supposed to be secret. Aside from that, he also communicates how disappointed he is in Crystal. Honestly, I would not want this Black Bolt to be disappointed in me. I would be like walking on eggshells with him if he was like, "I'm slightly disappointed in you, Amanda," or just stared at me and looked disappointed, because he couldn't really say that. He can only shout, well, he does shout to destroy Atalan, basically, that he's disappointed, so there you go. Even the rebellious Crystal seems to be affected by Black Bolt's guilt tripping though, agreeing to remain with her people despite being offered a place among the humans and the Fantastic Four. I mean, he doesn't even shout to destroy Atalan. What am I saying? He just says a word. That's also how powerful this version of him is. He's like, I'll just say a word, Crystal, your disappointment, and then it all just wipes away. Number 5, Medusa. Honestly, I would say pretty much all of the Inhumans at this point of the Ultimate Universe are the coolest versions around, hence why I have so many of them on this list, or at least, one of the coolest versions of the Inhumans around. I would say the coolest though. I think they are the coolest. Medusa is no exception, possibly having my most favorite redesign when it comes to her character. The Medusa of Earth 1610 is still Black Bolt's queen, but seems to have been named for her familiarity and appearance to the Gorgon of mythos. Medusa. This version of Medusa has snakes for hair. She also happens to be steadfastly loyal to her people. As I said before, we don't get to see too much of the Inhumans, but we do know that Medusa believes the Inhumans are basically superior to humans, and that distance should be maintained between their race and the humans in order to basically preserve their own culture and their own abilities. Medusa also expresses here that she has come to love her husband and accept him for who he is, despite the fact that he can never really show his love for her, at least not vocally. Which apparently is like a really big thorn in her side, because she seems to be very upset about it. She's like, Crystal, get over the fact that you don't want to hang out with us. Like, Black Bolt can't even talk to me, okay? If I can deal with that, you can deal with Maximus, okay? Let's just figure it out. Number 4, Hawkeye. Hawkeye actually has to be one of the coolest heroes in these comics, and no, I am not joking. The way they revamped this character was so impactful that the version of the character was a major influence on their MCU counterpart when it came time to pen down what that Hawkeye would be like. Clint Barton in the comics is known for being a hot mess typically, but in the Ultimate Universe, he was much more secretive, but also had a family. Tragically, his family ends up being found and killed in the process of enemies trying to hunt him down. When he is captured and severely mistreated by said captors, what does he do? He doesn't hang his head, he doesn't give up, he escapes, using his fingernails, his freaking fingernails as weapons. It doesn't get more badass than that. This Hawkeye does not even need arrows to be a deadly threat. I don't often get to hype Hawkeye here on Top 10 Nerd, so I just want to say thank you, Ultimate Universe, for giving me an opportunity to do so, because I do like Clint Barton, but we don't often get to put him at the top of these lists, or near the top, so yay. Number 3, Miles Morales. I know this is kind of a hot take when it comes to Spider-Man. I know there's some people in the comments who are gonna be like, I think Peter Parker is the best version. And that's fine, that's fair enough. But I really love Miles Morales in this role. Now, we do also have a Peter Parker in the Ultimate Universe of 1610, but he doesn't really do much to stand out for me in comparison to his main continuity counterpart. And don't get me wrong, I do love Peter Parker, but Miles is kind of like a breath of fresh air in some ways in comparison to the age-old hero. Why? Well, Peter has a tendency to be like really hard on himself. And aside from that, he's surrounded by tragedy at times. Honestly, there are runs where it feels like every time Peter turns a corner, a new tragedy might just be awaiting him around that corner. Miles actually has a family still living, and while he did lose his mom in the Ultimate Universe, it never really felt like a constant unresolved loss, like the death of Peter's Uncle Ben or his first love Gwen Stacy on Earth 616. And Rio, Miles' mom, is actually back now that the 1610 Miles has been permanently displaced, taking up residence in the 616 reality, and his family obviously is there with him. Miles also just has super cool powers. On top of much of what Peter has going on, Miles can also camouflage himself, and he has Venom Blast powers, so gotta give it to him. Sorry. Number 2, Gwen Stacy. Gwen Stacy is such an underrated character in the Marvel Ultimate Universe. On the Earth of 616, Gwen is, well, she's dead. Or she's probably dead. She might be showing up again soon, apparently, but it's probably a clone or like a trick or something. I don't believe it's the original Gwen Stacy. She's been dead and gone for many years. I don't think she's ever really gonna come back. In the Ultimate Universe, Gwen also kinda dies, but also kinda doesn't. She's killed by Carnage, not an alien symbiote, but kind of a lab-made one in this reality. And in essence, her consciousness becomes merged with it, meaning that Carnage becomes Gwen, and Gwen becomes Carnage. So yeah, as freaky as that sounds, in the Ultimate reality, Gwen Stacy lives on as Carnage. It's freaky and it's cool. Well, you might think this is the same as a clone Gwen in the 616 universe. It's not really. Because 1, she has the power of Carnage, and 2, she is an 100% exact biological duplicate who also possesses Gwen's mind up to the point of her death, which, you know, not all Gwen clones in 616 have, allowing Gwen to continue to grow and develop as she would have as a human, but simply with superpowers. Well, she only has superpowers for a bit, sadly. She has them until Eddie Brock's Venom assimilates Carnage, leaving her devoid of the symbiote and her powers going forward. I kinda wish she had stayed as Carnage, but it's fine. When she was Carnage though, I think that was super cool. Even though I know it was freaking her out, I thought she could have maybe become the new Carnage. That would have been neat. Number 1, the Maker. The Maker is the alternate version of Reed Richards. I actually have always felt that Richards might make a better villain than a hero, and the Maker seems to have been this thought made manifest. Living proof. Well, you know, fictional living proof. The Maker initially started out as a hero, leader of the team known as the Fantastic Four. However, in the Ultimate Universe, his and Sue's future of marital bliss was not as much guaranteed. And in fact, after the tragedy of Ultimatum and Sue Storm turning down his marriage proposal, Richards got a different perspective on life, which inevitably turned him into a villain. In this universe, Reed had a rough childhood, and part of where his villainy started was in turning on his family. A family that had mistreated him as he saw it for years. Yeah, in this reality, Reed commits patricide and matricide to get back at his parents. Very counter to his Earth 616 alternate, and that version's relationship with his family, which much better than this one. And speaking of knowledge, let's get counting. Number 10, Marvel's Lifeline. One of the best things about the Ultimate line was what it did for Marvel as a company and a publisher. It provided a lifeline to Marvel at a time when it needed it the most. The comics industry bubble that once had made collectibles so valuable had burst. The hype and demand of the early 90s had vanished completely, leaving Marvel with tons of comics printed that would simply not sell. With the demand gone and production costs putting them into the red, Marvel was forced to sell off licenses to some of their best characters. This is how Sony got the rights to Spider-Man and how Fox got the rights to X-Men. And it's what prompted Marvel to change things up and create the Ultimate Universe. The Ultimate Universe was meant to be something fresh and new, free of continuity and ultimately more gritty, realistic, and with an edge. Amazingly, the new line of Ultimate Comics did well. So well that it provided Marvel with the stability it needed to recover. Without the Ultimate line, it's possible that we might not have the Marvel stories, animated series, films, or comics of today. That's how successful and important Ultimates was. Number 9, the Inhumans. I've said it before and I will say it again, I think the design of the Inhumans is much better on Earth 1610. They look more compelling and intimidating. Nothing against the 616 Inhumans, who I also like just fine, but I actually want to get to know these Inhumans more. Overall, I think the Ultimate Inhumans are a little more interesting than their main continuity counterparts. Number 8, no previous continuity. One of the best things that the Ultimate Universe and line offered readers was a fresh start, meaning that years and years of comic book history didn't really apply here. The idea was you didn't have to know what had gone on in the past or what was going on currently in the comics to just jump into a book, with comic book continuity being a concept that many new readers still find daunting today. This was freeing for consumers because it meant you could buy in without having to worry about potentially being confused confused because something from 20 years prior came up that you needed to understand in order to know what was really going on in the story. This wasn't the case for Earth 1610. At least, it wasn't the case to begin with. Freedom from continuity meant more creative freedom for writers, but unfortunately, Ultimates really only started as new reader accessible, but quickly became bogged down with intricate storytelling and details. It even ended up having retcons as well, which might confuse readers jumping in later on, with the first Ultimate Iron Man series being so out there that Marvel decided to retcon it out of existence, instead turning it into a ridiculous anime show set in the same universe, but that wasn't actually considered to be the true story of Iron Man. So that comic basically became like non-canon. Number 7, Sue and Reed splits. Finally, this reality is one where Sue seems to be more aware that Reed can never really fully commit to her. He proposes right before Ultimatum goes down, and they are faced with a giant wave as a result. Sue manages to push the wave back, but slips into a comatose state as a result, prompting Reed to go out looking to punish the villains and abandoning Sue, leaving her with the Thing, aka Ben Grimm. In the Ultimate Universe, Reed and Sue actually don't end up together in the end. In fact, Sue, after she's revived, finds out about a sinister plot of Reed's, realizing that he has become a villain. Ben attempts to try and explain how Reed could just be up to something that they both don't fully understand, but Sue is over making any more excuses for him, implying that she never wanted to marry him to begin with. In fact, Sue and Ben actually end up together, with Reed becoming a villain. For some reason, I actually find this to be just a better fit for these two characters, just in terms of their overall paths. As much as they've had some pretty sweet moments together on Earth 616, the couple has also had major problems over the years that sometimes seem just to get swept under the rug so that we can try to keep them together without any resolution of those problems. This, however, provides us with some resolution and consequence for those moments, and it kind of addresses some of them, which I like. Just feels a little more realistic.
Number 6, joining the X-Men. So while he was in deep cover, Wolverine sparked up a romance with Jean Grey. Now he wanted to seal the deal, really make it look believable, so he went on with this fake romance. Thing is, Wolverine actually fell in love with her. Oops. Now Scott, aka Cyclops, was a little upset during this, and Magneto actually wanted Scott to be with Wanda. But Scott had other ideas. But Scott was actually undercover as well, so he was on the bad team and then Wolverine was on the good team. It was basically The Departed, but superheroes instead. The Jean and Wolverine affair gave Scott a reason to go and talk shop with Magneto. So he went in and then found out this plan, which was to wipe out Washington with Sentinels, and then the X-Men intervened and saved the president, who was naked at this time, just, because sure. And this is when Wolverine fully becomes an X-Men. He attacks Magneto, with Quicksilver even removing Magneto's helmet to make it easier for him. So everybody came around and joined the good team, which is great. And then a page later, Wolverine is now in his new, much cozier home. And their first mission as the new X-Men team with Wolverine was to head back to Weapon X as a team to get some answers. Number 5, jealousy. Now this Wolverine gets pretty jealous as well. He takes things to a new height when he discovers that Jean Grey truly loves Cyclops. So Logan now wasn't a fan of Cyclops. There was this deep rift growing between them. So Charles was like, hey guys, why don't you both go to Savage Land together and work it out? As dudes, couple dudes working it out. You can talk, throw rocks, whatever. They did not work it out. They got into a huge fight, and what happened really was Wolverine let Cyclops fall to his death in order to get Jean back. Cyclops survived because, of course he did, and he exposed Wolverine to the crew, but Cyclops didn't blast him with his visions. No, he just blasted him with words. So he let Wolverine stay on the team, and this whole time, Wolverine just sat and felt guilt. He was like, damn, maybe I am not a good friend after all. Interesting. He started to become a leader, and he let his past self die. He became a role model for the younger X-Men, like Rogue, and then he ended up becoming pretty good friends with Cyclops, even though, he threw him off a cliff and all. Number 4, Sabretooth. So yeah, maybe you're wondering what ended up happening with that other insane guy, Victor. Well, when the team first went back to Weapon X, they came across Wraith and Sabretooth. Now, Sabretooth did one of the worst things ever at this point. He burned the files on Wolverine, literally just destroying his past right in front of him. And this leads them to their first violent conflict. They go back and forth, throwing each other into trees, and Sabretooth thinks that he's got him at one point. He's got him underwater, so he's holding Wolverine's head underwater, and he's questioning how exactly a healing factor will fix a suffocated brain, which is a great question. He's like, oh yeah, you hear that popping in your nose? That's your brain cells exploding. Now, it's cool, except Wolverine's underwater this whole time, you probably didn't hear any of this monologue, but it's still cool. But Wolverine's got that healing factor, which is probably stronger than we think. Number 3, healing factor. Ultimate Wolverine has been known to have a weaker healing factor than our 616 Wolverine, but it's kind of his main thing. I mean, Ultimate Wolverine can regenerate his body tissue so well that at one point, believe it or not, Wolverine was stuck under an iceberg, and the only way he survived was to bank on that healing factor, and he ate himself. The dude ate his arms, like he ate his body. It's like 127 hours, only, you know, he's fine. He just has to eat good. He ate strips of his own arm because he had to. I mean, he can grow it back, so it's not too horrible. No, that's still pretty horrible, actually, now that I think of it. Superheroes are wild because this opens up the meat dimension theory, which is just a blast. If you haven't heard of it, I strongly recommend you Google it after this. All this regeneration, where does the meat come from? Where does it go? Can he eat forever? What's going on? Question for you guys, if you could regenerate your cells and you were stuck, would you do it? Would you eat yourself? Let us know in the comments. That's a weird thing. Let us know in the comments though. I'm still curious. Number 2, adaptable. In Ultimate Wolverine vs. Hulk, it was said that Wolverine's power might be the survival ability. It's like his main thing. Because at one point his head gets clean off his body. It's just taken off, but he's still alive. And Nick Fury makes a good point here. He's like, well, if it was a healing factor, he would still be dead right about now, because it's just his head. Still doesn't make any sense. But Ultimate Wolverine's head was alive and well. Now, without his lungs, he should not be able to breathe, but he adapted and started breathing through his skin. So he's adaptable in the most ultimate way. Number 1, combat. So the way he's able to fight off Sabretooth after being held underwater is just by going right in between the legs. He fights dirty, claws are out, he's doing what he has to be done. Wolverine says, hey, at least I have enough brain cells left to cover my family jewels in a fight. And I gotta tell you, that's a great call. Also, that's a great sentence to say right before you toss somebody off a cliff. This guy loves tossing people off cliffs, eh? Wow. So the ultimate combat is a bit more dirty, a little more rough than his 616 counterpart, I'd say. But that's because he kind of has to be, because his healing factor isn't as strong as a 616, and even his adamantium skeleton is not that helpful. Adamantium is weaker in the Ultimate Universe, fun fact. But even so, one time Magneto ripped his skeleton out of his skin and Wolverine had to regrow his entire body back. That's the most painful thing I can imagine. I still don't want that to happen, healing or not. I would fight dirty even if my bones were made of adamantium and even if my skin still came back out of nowhere. Because pain is still pain, and I don't want any of that pain. No, no sir.
Number 10, Black Widow. The Avengers in the Ultimate Universe are different from their main continuity counterparts, as while the Avengers in 616 are a team of bona fide heroes brought together by massive and often global threats, the Avengers of Earth 1610 were brought together by Nick Fury, and are often a team composed of former villains and kinda anti-heroes, people less marketable generally than 1610's Ultimates, which are like the equivalent to the 616's Avengers. Instead, the Avengers from 1610 end up becoming more comparable to DC's Suicide Squad, a team of reluctant participants who are forced to work together to complete missions for S.H.I.E.L.D. and Nick Fury. Monica Chang, however, was not one of the more criminal-based members of the team, and instead was the new Black Widow. She was given the mantle of Black Widow after the death of Natasha, who it turned out was a traitor to S.H.I.E.L.D., the Ultimates, and the USA. Monica was with the Avengers team from day one, joining them on their first mission to apprehend Steve Rogers, aka Captain America, and locate and put a stop to the Red Skull. Monica doesn't have any superpowers, but is a trained agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. She is a skilled spy, combatant, and is experienced with various types of firearms, though typically is known for wielding 2 pistols. While wearing her Stark suit, she also possessed enhanced strength and speed. However, she was still a normal human, and as such was still able to be killed fairly easily when she went up against the immortal Green Goblin. Poor Monica though, I feel like that whole thing kinda did her dirty because, you know, she actually survived for a long time prior to that. So it was really weird that she was like, I'm gonna go into this fight and I'm gonna be super unprepared. Hey, then you die. That's what happens. Monica should know that. Number 9, the Punisher. The Punisher in the reality of Earth 1610 was a member of both Nick Fury's Howling Commandos, who fought against the Maker's Dark Ultimates, and a member of Fury's Avengers. The Punisher's powers are basically the same as his Earth 616 counterpart. In other words, he doesn't really have any superpowers. He's mostly just a man who is really skilled in his use of various firearms. He was a trained police officer with the NYPD, so it was lots of tactical training and experience. The first time he joined the Avengers, it was to protect the Vice President against Ghost Rider, but the spirit of vengeance convinced Frank to stand down, and even assist him in the end, also helping him to escape. The Punisher would also escape S.H.I.E.L.D. custody following the mission, but would later be recruited once more by Fury after he ended up in prison. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list, if you want more Ultimate lists, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Also, check out our Ultimate Marvel Universe playlist for more videos like this. Number 8. Red Wasp. Red Wasp initially went by the name of Swarm and was a member of the antagonistic Liberators team. She was believed to have been killed in the fight between the Liberators and the Ultimates by the Wasp, Janet Van Dyne, who became giant and stepped on Swarm. However, Petra Laskov managed to survive, saved by S.H.I.E.L.D. and put into rehabilitation by them. Rehabilitation. She was made to work for them and join up with their Avengers team. They even placed an obedience chip within her to make sure that she followed orders. Rehabilitation. During her time with S.H.I.E.L.D., Petra would take up the mantle Red Wasp. She can shrink herself down to the size of an insect and can control large swarms of insects as well. However, because of her insect-like abilities, she can also be defeated using insect repellent. So, pretty cool powers, but with a pretty big weakness. Number 7. Blade. Blade was recruited to the Avengers by Nick Fury, who promised to deliver him Deacon Frost in exchange for his service. Frost is the man responsible for killing Blade's mother and turning him into the creature that he is, in case you didn't know that. Blade helped to apprehend Tyrone Cash after S.H.I.E.L.D. learned he was responsible for selling off their super soldiers on the black market. Blade incapacitated Cash through hypnosis. Ooh, supernatural powers. However, despite him being part vampire, Blade is not as tough as you'd expect, especially in comparison to the tough version of the character we know from the Earth 616. Iron Man found that out when he basically crushed the poor anti-hero. Blade's time serving as part of the Ultimate Avengers may have also helped to get him on the main continuity Avengers team of Earth 616 in the future. I also gotta say, I really love Blade as an addition to the 616 Avengers. I don't know if everybody else is super enjoying that, but I'm really enjoying that. Are you enjoying that? I hope you are. Number 6. Nick Fury. Another great thing that the Ultimate Universe gave us was a new Nick Fury that was so successful he actually became the new version of Nick Fury in the main continuity, and inspired the MCU version of the character as well. Hilariously enough, Samuel L. Jackson's likeness inspired the redesign of the character. Fury would even acknowledge that Jackson would be his top pick to play him in a movie. The story goes that originally Samuel L. Jackson was actually not too happy about Marvel using his likeness without really asking him or without any compensation or conversation about it, but when he contacted them, they actually apologized and offered him the role of Nick Fury in any future films. Jackson supposedly was appeased and accepted the offer, and the rest, they say, is history. Today, I personally cannot imagine the MCU without him. Number 5. Death. Wait a minute, Amanda, didn't you just cite death as being a bad thing on your worst list? Yes, I did. We were talking about Ultimatum. But that was more death for the sake of death, not death in general. I actually enjoy when characters die. Well, I don't enjoy when they die, but more than I enjoy the finality that death invites. I like death as consequences, but more than that, I like the higher stakes that it gives us. If anyone at any point can die, it means that everything is more exciting because, you know, they might not make it back from that mission. Their actions carry more weight because there's a real risk that they face. When characters can die, it also means stories get to end, and with endings come new and exciting beginnings. Number 4. The Maker. Talk about unique spins on characters. The Maker definitely offered us a completely different take on Reed Richards, one that was more modern and actually felt like it kind of fit better, not just within the world, but within a more current day and age. I think a huge issue with the Fantastic Four that we see when it comes to adapting that team to sort of a film setting in the modern day is that the heroes are kind of stiff. They're definitely a product of the time period in which they were created, a perfect and kind of wholesome family unit. The Ultimate Universe shattered that expectation, broke up the Fantastic Four team, and gave us the amazing villain that is the Maker, a version of Reed Richards whose love and dedication to science actually makes him a horrifying, immoral pretty much mad scientist type, if a mad scientist could somehow also be like disturbingly sane and logical. The Maker is one of the best villains to have ever existed in comics in general, not even just within the confines of the Ultimate Universe, which of course the Maker would also literally break free from in the comics. Number 3, Ultimate Spider-Man. Although there were many problems when it came to the continuity of the Ultimate Universe, the Spider-Man series was not one of them. In fact, Ultimate Spider-Man was more celebrated for being a breath of fresh air that remained consistently coherent throughout. To this day, it remains some fans' favorite Spider-Man comic series, period, and not just one of their favorite series within the Ultimate Universe. Some even hold this series above any of the Spider-Man main continuity stuff. Why was the Spider-Man series so good from Ultimates? It had a sense of finality, and it wasn't wishy-washy. It committed, it followed through, it offered fresh new takes on characters, and whether or not you loved all of those new takes, you had to respect them. Most of those changes were made to make Spider-Man's stories and characters feel more grounded, more realistic. Peter also returned to high school, which a lot of fans enjoyed because they felt it was younger Peter, Spider-Man in high school, that was kind of his most relatable version. So taking him back there felt really good. Number 2, Miles Morales. One of the greatest things to come out of Ultimate Spider-Man as well, the story and character of Miles Morales, whom we've all come to love very dearly. What's more, Peter's apparent death also paved the way for Miles, allowing him to step into the spotlight as Spider-Man, and even take over. Even after we learned that Peter Parker had actually survived as well and wasn't actually dead due to the Oz formula making him virtually immortal, he still decided to pass the torch to Miles. He'd had his time as a hero, now it was Miles' turn. I just love how the story goes. I love that Miles truly got to be the one and only Spider-Man on Earth 1610. And while I love Peter, I kind of hope we get to see Miles step into the spotlight as the one and only Spider-Man at some point on Earth 616 too. Or bring back a world where he is the one and only Spider-Man. Number 1, the MCU. The Ultimate line is what helped to pave the way for the MCU, and in fact provided much needed inspiration for the cinematic universe. There are many characters from Earth 1610 who have influenced their Earth 199999 counterparts. That is, their Marvel Cinematic Universe counterparts. Not only have characters from the Ultimate Universe found their way to the big screen through the MCU, but stories from the Ultimate line have also served to inspire some of those told to us in the films. Number 10, Maximus the Mad. I just like the look of Maximus the Mad here. We don't get to see too much of him or the other Inhumans, but what I like about him and them is kind of just that. They're more alluring when they're kept mysterious. Maximus, in case you didn't know, is the brother to Black Bolt. In the Earth 616 universe, he is known as Maximus the Mad, as I believe he's also known here. He is often depicted as such in terms of his appearance in the 616 continuity, and is also made to look somewhat more flamboyant in comparison to his Earth 1610, his Ultimate Universe counterpart. I do love that Maximus just looks like a normal dude in the Ultimate Universe, because also I just feel like just because you're mad doesn't mean you look different, you know what I mean? You just look normal. I think that actually makes him more frightening to me as well, that he just looks so normal, so average, especially among the rest of the Inhumans, who all look pretty freaky, stand out, and honestly somewhat monstrous here. This more bleak take on the whole group in the Ultimate Universe makes me want to see a film version of them that was more of like a supernatural horror, especially considering they consider Adelan to actually be like a heaven here, yet it's so dark. I believe based on this depiction, there could be promise in something like a supernatural horror film version of them. Number 9, Gregory Stark. Sorry Arno, move over, Gregory is here. I like Arno Stark, okay, but Gregory was a pretty cool villain to have, and he wasn't the secret brother of Iron Man either. Gregory is actually not just known, he's often more well-liked than Tony is in the Ultimate Universe, at least initially. Tony is seen as being a bit of a loose cannon in comparison to his older twin brother, you see, who constantly has things way more together and is also super wicked smart. But that also works well for Gregory's character, as he also turns out to be, you guessed it, a bad guy. Of course, No one can be that good. We should have known. Gregory manipulated S.H.I.E.L.D. in order to get full control of it, and when all the pieces were in play, basically attempted to take over the world. He had to be taken out by Tony Stark, but in a much more permanent way than Tony when he dealt with Arno in the Earth 616 reality. Tony, in part, actually helped to kill his brother. He used an EMP to disrupt his nanites, which made Gregory critically vulnerable to an attack from Thor. Ouch. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list, be sure to head on over to Facebook to show us some love, where you can give us a follow, a like, and check out all the cool content we have over there. Number 8, Crystal. I really love the original Crystal, especially in terms of her appearance, but I also do love the super rebellious vibes we get from Earth 1610 Ultimate Crystal in this narrative. Here, Crystal is still the little sister of Medusa, but this group of Inhumans, Medusa included, are even less likely to mingle with humans. They simply want to live a completely separate and simple life, which bothers Crystal, who it seems is searching for something more, something outside of her own family. Acting out, she runs away from her people, not eager to play the loyal member of the royal court, and not fond of her fiance, Black Bolt's brother, Maximus the Mad. Yeah, they're engaged in this reality. She runs into the Fantastic Four, and in so doing kind of reveals to them the secret location of Adelan as they pursue her after she is retrieved by her people. Crystal ends up deciding to stay with the Inhumans too, despite her unhappiness, which I also think is an interesting choice, and it gets me wanting to know more about both Crystal and the Inhumans in this universe. Cause like the Fantastic Four were also just like, you come chill with us, but she's like, nah, this is how it's gotta be, even though I definitely was not super here for this, but I still gotta stick with my fam. Number 7, Nick Fury. The Nick Fury of the Ultimate Universe, Earth 1610, isn't perfect. In fact, he can kind of seem like he's being a butt a lot of the time, but in reality, it's just that Nick Fury often doesn't trust people. He keeps his plans and reasons behind them close to his chest, and while you might not understand them and therefore think he's callous, he's often just trying to make the hard call. Nick Fury has some flaws, I'll grant you, especially if we're talking about his relationship with his ex-wife and everything that apparently went wrong there. But this version of the character would become so beloved that he actually go on to inspire an Earth 616 counterpart in Nick Fury Jr., and of course would inspire the version of the character we saw up on the big screen in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where he was portrayed by the one and only Samuel L. Jackson. Samuel L. Jackson, in fact, also served as inspiration for the 1610 counterpart in the comics when it came to his appearance, and Mr. Jackson was actually the character's first pick, of course, when asked in canon who would be best to portray him in a film. Number 6, Hawkeye. But wait a minute, isn't Hawkeye a member of the Ultimates? Well, yes, he has been that too, but hey, he can do both. Hawkeye, despite being more of a bona fide hero, still had a pretty shady past, which was what made him a great candidate for the Avengers team. Nick Fury invited him to join originally when they went on the hunt for Red Skull, and Barton agreed. In fact, I believe Hawkeye actually helped to bring this team together as well. The Avengers team for him was like a Black Ops group willing to do the dirty work that the Ultimates couldn't be seen getting involved in. Often this meant the villains they went after usually ended up dead. Such was the case with Red Skull in the end. Hawkeye might just seem like a guy with a bow, and well, he is. But he is really good with that bow. He has enhanced vision, which allows him to see much farther and clearer than your average human, and he is an extremely skilled fighter, pilot, and spy. So, you know. Also, he's deadly with fingernails, so watch yourself if you're just facing him as he is. If he's got fingernails, he's got weapons. Number 5, War Machine. War Machine is James Rhodes, who became a close friend to Iron Man and ended up being gifted a suit of armor from Tony to use in his own heroic adventures. He would end up being recruited and serve on the revived Avengers project as a member of the team during their first mission, where they attempted to defeat and capture Red Skull. Rhodey happened to be armed with a nuke to use against the Red Skull as part of a last resort plan, if needed. But the Red Skull had overheard about this plan and said nuke, and so managed to disable it easily using the Cosmic Cube. Honestly, if the Red Skull didn't have the Cosmic Cube though at this time, my money would have definitely been on War Machine in this fight, because War Machine I think is pretty powerful. War Machine would also for a time gain temporary Hulk-like powers after being given some of Tyrone Cash's Hulk serum. Number 4, Nerd Hulk. While Nerd Hulk is a very powerful character in terms of his abilities, being on the same level of power as Bruce Banner's Hulk from Earth 1610, he tends to end up being not so powerful in actuality when battling other people. This is because he has a tendency to hold back though. Nerd Hulk is a clone that Gregory Stark, Tony Stark's brother, created. Nerd Hulk prefers to try and resolve conflicts using logic as opposed to violence, and it is the marriage of his intellect and strength combined that holds him back from being as deadly as he could be. Still, the potential is there, and he does have access to the same amount of strength and ferocity as Banner if he'd only feel inclined to use it. Nerd Hulk was a member of the Avengers team when they were first resurrected and went after Red Skull. He would also later attempt to join the Ultimates, but he was denied membership. Sad. Poor Nerd Hulk. I love him with his little glasses. Number 3, Gregory Stark. Gregory Stark is like the evil brother of Tony Stark. He is the more immoral of the two when it comes to technology, but is more put together overall in comparison to his brother. Much less of a mess, if you will. This obviously made him a valuable asset to S.H.I.E.L.D. and Nick Fury, and so he ended up on the Avengers team. However, Gregory was also super smart, and was using his time working with S.H.I.E.L.D. to put certain plans into action that would allow him to take over control and eventually kind of rule the world, sort of. After Fury seemingly went rogue and Carol Danvers was also removed from the chessboard, Gregory was made the new director of S.H.I.E.L.D. and attempted to use his influence and nanite tech to cause chaos and war to erupt in other nations. Fortunately, he would be defeated by his brother Tony, who disabled his nanites with an EMP, allowing Thor to take him down. Still, for a time, Gregory was a pretty valuable member of the Avengers team, and later a formidable villain to them and to the Ultimates. And for that, he gets some bonus points. That's what I say. Gold Star Gregory Stark. That's what I call him. For evilness, I guess. Number 2, Tyrone Cash. Tyrone Cash was a fairly powerful version of the Hulk, and actually was the first Hulk to exist in the Ultimate Universe. He created the Hulk serum before his protege Bruce Banner was able to, and decided to use it on himself. This gave him massive strength, and he took the name Tyrone Cash, and decided to become a criminal, using his brilliant intellect to avoid capture for longer than a decade. Previously, he'd been known as the Scientist and as Banner's mentor, Professor Leonard Williams. Eventually, Cash was apprehended and forced to join the Avengers team, and after S.H.I.E.L.D. learned that he'd betrayed them, Fury had him executed. So of course, who's the most powerful? Who could it be? Number 1, Nick Fury. When it comes to the Avengers team, Nick Fury is like the Amanda Waller of it all, in comparison to the Ultimate Avengers DC counterpart, which would likely be the Suicide Squad. Nick Fury was the one to resurrect Project Avengers, and while he claimed this was done to hunt down the Red Skull, Captain America's villainous son in this reality, it is actually believed that Fury had orchestrated Red Skull's return in order to get his job back as director of S.H.I.E.L.D. and resurrect the old abandoned Avengers project. That's just so Nick Fury, I'm just saying. Nick Fury holds a lot of power, not just as a master spy who often deals in secrets, but also because he was exposed to the super soldier serum and has influence over the rest of the Avengers team as their overall leader and organizer. He's just got a lot of power. He's also like got a million plans, so if you're like, oh, I know how I'll beat Nick Fury, he probably already has a plan for if you try to do that to him. That's how good he is. Number 10, Charles Xavier. Professor X did die in this reality, but before that, he was a gifted telepath. The manifestation of his powers in the Ultimates reality is actually believed to have caused his hair loss. That's right, his powers are so powerful, they caused him to go bald. I love it. Charles became good friends with Eric in this reality, and the two would band together as partners to create the Brotherhood of Mutants. However, the two split ways after Magneto started to see humans as inferior to mutants, believing that mutant kind should actually rule the world. And in case you didn't know, that's what leads to Professor X's death. Number 9, Captain Britain. Captain Britain was the brother of the original one to hold that mantle, Brian Braddock. James Braddock Jr., Brian's brother, took up the mantle of Captain Britain after his brother ended up in a coma. He is considered to be slightly stronger than the original and would go on to try and help Thor fight against the Children of Tomorrow. Captain Britain was one of the few to survive that battle. He'd also end up later on serving on the Ultimates team. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more lists like it where we explore alternate realities, be sure to show us by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8. Daredevil. Matt has a story that is similar to his origins in 616, but is also unique in how much more personal his connections are to, well, pretty much everyone around him, and how much enemies and allies influenced his choices to become a hero and defined what being a hero means to him. Matt Murdock, like his 616 counterpart, was also blinded at a young age, but found his other senses enhanced. His father also died after refusing to cooperate in a fixed boxing match. However, in this reality, Kingpin was directly responsible for his father's murder. Like in the reality of 616, Daredevil's experience, training, and enhanced senses make him a gifted fighter. Number 7. Spider-Woman. In this reality, Jessica Drew has a completely different backstory. She is actually the clone of Peter Parker, made to be an exact copy of him, but female. As such, she has all of his memories. Initially, she was intended to be used as a government weapon, repurposed and trained as an agent, but she and the other spider clones they made escaped. Jessica would go on to keep her memories, but separate herself from them and Peter, taking her own name and carving out her own life for herself, though still acting as a hero. At one point in time, she was a member of the Ultimates, much like how Jessica Drew of Earth 616 is a well-known member of the Avengers. Number 6. Colossus. A strong mutant on Earth 616 and in 1610. Initially, Pyotr Rasputin did not possess super strength as part of his power set, but was given a drug called Banshee to enhance his strength, as well as a job working for the Russian mafia. Eventually, he ended up joining the X-Men, though he would leave the team on a few separate occasions. He'd managed to hold off Scarlet Witch, save a submarine that not even the Ultimates were capable of saving, and defeat Proteus, David Xavier, Xavier's son, who threatened the entire world with violence, traveling around and targeting international landmarks the world over. Differences between Colossus of Earth 1610 and that of Earth 616 is that here he isn't inherently strong, as I said before, in his steel form, but needs Banshee to give him that boost. And he's also gay. He even for a time dates fellow mutant Northstar. Number 5. Jimmy Hudson. Jimmy Hudson is the son of Wolverine. He also inherited his claws, superior senses, and regenerative healing factor. Like his dad, it's believed that his powers may actually be based in survival as opposed to just healing, with James being seen as adapting to survive injury or harsh environments as needed. Unlike Wolverine, Jimmy can choose to coat his claws in metal, as this is actually part of his power set, and it's believed that only his claws end up being coated, not the rest of his skeleton. Jimmy was a crucial member of the mutant resistance, which fought against Sentinel and militia attacks that threatened to wipe out the mutants. In the end, the mutants were victorious and were given a choice of going to live on their own piece of land in Utah or taking a cure for their mutation. Jimmy was one of the few mutants who decided to keep his powers. Number 4. Storm. Initially in the Ultimate Universe, Storm didn't have great control over her powers, and mostly got by stealing cars, but after the X-Men took her in, she learned how to control and even master her powers, allowing her to become one of the most fearsome and powerful mutants around. Ultimate Storm is so cool. Storm is so fast, she has been shown to be able to catch people who are falling in midair, dodge bullets, and even keep pace with a plane. Impressive considering planes on average travel at speeds over 540 miles per hour or over 870 kilometers per hour. That's fast. She's also likely not someone you want to tangle with, as even when she takes hits in battles, she tends to keep fighting or instinctively strike back. Using her lightning storm and weather control powers, she's also managed to defeat multiple opponents with one single attack, whether they be Sentinel opponents or human opponents, and in some cases, even killing them. I think at one point she kills like 11 people at once, and it's just like, okay. Don't mess with Storm. Got it. I mean, I already knew that before from her 616, but now I really know. Number 3, Jean Grey. In Ultimates, it almost seems there is nothing Jean can't do. Before she joined the X-Men, she was in a mental institution as the manifestation of her powers made her seem insane. However, Professor X would save Jean and recruit her on his X-Men team, with her being the second member. In the Ultimate Universe, we have seen Jean become possessed by what she thought was a cosmic entity referred to as the Phoenix God, and almost lose control and her sanity. The biggest problem with Jean is similar to that of her Earth 616 counterpart. Immense power threatens to basically break her mind, or at least take over her sense of sanity. In the comics, Jean is not only a skilled telepath and was even able to read Wolverine's mind, something Professor X believed wasn't even possible, but she also happens to, weirdly enough, be a skilled doctor and surgeon as well, although I'm pretty sure she doesn't have any medical license. Say what? Jean was even shown to be capable of connecting and tapping into the multiverse to reach out and see various versions of herself. Basically, she can do everything because being a telepath is crazy powerful. Number 2, Magneto. Obviously, one of the most powerful mutants out there has to be Magneto, not just for the powers of magnetism that he wields, but also just for his influence. Magneto was the mastermind behind Ultimatum. I suppose I should use the term mastermind lightly there, as Ultimatum in general is not really seen very favorably in most fans' eyes. I admit it was controversial and caused a lot of perhaps needless death. In fact, I would say it was needless death. But you have to acknowledge just how much of a threat it painted Magneto out to be. While I'm not sure about Magneto basically committing genocide as a victim of one himself, you have to admit that this made him one of the most fearsome characters in all of the Ultimate Universe. And for Magneto, there is power in fear, even though oddly enough, it is usually fear that tends to power the hate that he often stands up against. Number 1, Kitty Pryde. One of the most powerful characters as a leader especially. She ends up becoming the ruler of the mutant tent nation that the mutants dub Utopia. This is a portion of land in Utah that the mutants who choose not to accept the cure are given. In fact, all those who refuse to take the cure are forced to live there. Kitty ends up fighting a war against Jean Grey in the Ultimate Universe as well, because Jean wants Kitty to join the mutant nation that she was put in charge of ruling after the death of Zorn with an X, Xian. But Kitty refuses to bring their people together. Kitty is such a good leader, she even steps down from her title as the leader of Utopia to help ease the target on her own people's backs because of her and Jean's conflict. Kitty and Utopia would end up winning that war, and Kitty would also play a crucial role in defeating Galactus as well. Also, I gotta say, that whole World War X thing, it was pretty weird. Number 10, Kraven the Hunter. Kraven on Earth 1610 is actually the star of a show following him as he hunts down dangerous and exotic animals. He planned on hunting Spider-Man to improve his show's ratings, but was exposed as a fraud when Spider-Man handily defeated him with one punch. Obsessed with getting revenge on Spider-Man for costing him his reputation, his job, and apparently his wife, Kraven experimented on himself, transforming himself into a lion-like monster. Eventually, he would go on to join the Sinister Six and continue to try to fight and kill Spider-Man. Kraven is a skilled tracker, and after his experimentation had superhuman levels of strength, speed, and endurance, becoming a much more fearsome opponent. Much more fearsome. Number 9, Prowler. Prowler is an interesting villain because when Miles Morales was moved over to Earth 616 after the destruction of Earth 1610 and the amalgamation of the Marvel Universe into Battleworld, Aaron Davis, Miles' uncle, also survived. Aaron Davis used to be partners in crime with Miles' father, his brother, Jefferson. But after the birth of his son, Jefferson decided to go on the straight and narrow, while Aaron continued on with his criminal activities. Initially, Aaron died in Earth 1610 after attempting to blackmail and then kill his nephew, knowing of his true identity as Spider-Man. However, he also found himself returned to life when Miles was moved over to Earth 616. He woke up in bed as though his death had never happened. He would end up becoming a criminal again, recruiting the Sinister Six and fighting against his nephew once more. His antagonism would actually inspire the formation of the Champions. Eventually, though, Aaron would attempt to also give up his criminal ways, being convinced by his nephew that he could do better. And friends, if you love villains as much as I love villains, please show that love by giving this video a thumbs up. Seriously, when you hit that thumbs up or when you click the subscribe, it really does help us out, so thank you for doing it. Number 8, Black Widow. Black Widow was almost one of the most successful villains around. She played the role of hero so well, no one saw her betrayal coming, not even her fiance Tony Stark. Yep, in this world, Iron Man and Black Widow end up romantically together. However, it's later revealed that this was all part of Black Widow's plan to betray the Avengers and steal Stark's fortune. Mwahaha. Instead of redeeming herself and becoming a hero, Black Widow here remains a villain through and through, and is just pretending to be a hero. She even kills Jarvis. Oh no! But in the end, Stark is able to use the nanotech in her blood, which allows her to control the suit that he made for her as a wedding gift to neutralize Black Widow. Though not in time to save Jarvis, sadly. Black Widow would get hers in the end when Hawkeye found out where she was being kept and killed her as revenge for her orchestrating the death of his family and his own capture and torture. Yeah, Black Widow is really bad in the Ultimate Universe. Number 7, Colonel. The Colonel was Abdul al-Rahman. He was a super soldier just like Captain America and was actually a hero to his own nation. He was part of the Liberators, the same group of villains that Black Widow was allied with. Abdul's powers were comparable to Captain America, as he was also a super soldier. In fact, believed to be the first successful super soldier since the creation of Cap. The Liberators were considered a group of villains by the Ultimates and the USA, but were in reality a multinational group of superpowered beings who banded together in their hopes to even the playing field for the rest of the world by destroying the Ultimates. The depiction of these villains was extremely political, problematic, and even at times racist. But if you consider his motivations and his backstory, Abdul was actually a pretty cool character. To add likely to his evil but badass appearance, he also fought with what appeared to be a double-bladed, well, a lightsaber. Energy blades, I think they're called, that looked very similar to Darth Maul's. Because, you know, Darth Maul's a bad guy. So how do we make Abdul look like a bad guy? Give him the same thing that Darth Maul fights with. What is happening? It's the Star Wars Marvel superhero crossover that none of us necessarily asked for, but there you go. Number 6, the Wasp. When it comes to Janet Van Dyne, you might just think of her untimely and gruesome end in Ultimates, eaten by the Blob as she was, but there is a lot more to her character than just that very graphic death. Janet was also for a time the leader of the Ultimates after they decided to split off from S.H.I.E.L.D. She was chosen as leader because she was considered one of the most experienced members. Many underestimated her because her abilities were about her shrinking as opposed to growing to ginormous sizes, which made enemies consider her weak and insignificant, but she would prove to them just how powerful she was. Her untimely end did not really seem deserved, and fortunately it was undone when the Maker resurrected the alternate world over 1610. Number 5, Cyclops. If you thought Magneto was OP in this universe, Cyclops was technically the one to put an end to him. Here, Scott Summers was the one responsible for using his optic blast to completely destroy Magneto after he himself had killed billions, including the person who had brought the X-Men together, Professor X. Cyclops in the comics was also for a time a member of Magneto's Brotherhood. In this reality, Magneto even considered him as a potential heir when it came to a leadership role. However, Scott would eventually betray Magneto after he learned of his plans to attack and destroy Washington, D.C. using reprogrammed Sentinels. Number 4, Jimmy Hudson. In the Ultimate reality, Jimmy Hudson is the son of Wolverine and Magneto's wife, Magda. Jimmy would only learn upon his powers first manifesting that Wolverine was his dad. In a message left for him, Wolverine would specifically stress that Jimmy not really focus on who his real mother was or on his past, but continue to move forward and to respect the Hudsons as his parents who had taken him in and raised him on Wolverine's behalf. His powers are similar to Wolverine. He has a regenerative healing factor and bone claws. Jimmy can also coat his claws at will with a metallic substance. Jimmy has bonded with one of the symbiotic aliens known as the Poisons, but seems to maintain control of himself even while bonded with the Poison. So he's basically got like a little symbiote alien pal, but not a symbiote like how Venom's a symbiote, not from Clinter. Number 3, Machine Man. Danny Ketch was originally a spy and operative that was recruited to be a part of Nick Fury's Howling Commandos after the dissolution of the Ultimates. He would end up facing the global threat of the Galactus Swarm and MODOK in the Maker's City of Tomorrow. Danny would sacrifice himself to merge with the Swarm in order to free the captives of the city. Once merged, he then also prevented MODOK from escaping and blew up the city in order to defeat the enemy. It turned out, however, that Danny had survived with his consciousness being transferred to nanite technology that reappeared following this explosion. Aided by Agent Phil Coulson, the nanites were used to recreate a version of Danny Ketch, who was then dubbed the Machine Man. Number 2, Storm. Storm was invited to join the X-Men team by Jean Grey, who managed to save her from the police who were attempting to apprehend her because she had stolen a car. Initially, Storm had attempted to ditch Jean, thinking that she was working for Magneto, but when she learned of Professor X and his more noble mutant cause, she agreed to join. Her powers were more unpredictable and hard for Storm to control initially, with her not necessarily being established as one who had been worshipped as a goddess. However, over time training alongside the X-Men with Professor X, she would become a formidable fighter, hero, and X-Men member. Also, pretty much in every reality, Storm is just super OP. Number 1, Jean Grey. Just like in the main continuity of Earth 616, Jean is considered one of the most powerful characters around. Here, however, at least she has some pretty big problems to wrestle with on top of all of her power. When her powers first manifested, others thought that she was insane, which meant that Professor X ended up meeting with her and recruiting her from a mental institution. Initially, Jean also wasn't even sure if the Phoenix Force was real or not. Was it some intergalactic god, some manifestation of her own powers which were growing and expanding, or a demon seeking to destroy the planet? Her mental health has always been the counterpoint to her power, as Jean questions her own sanity in the Ultimate Universe, and yet she still wields godlike power. A deadly combination, but of course, Jean does her best to wield it wisely.